Two eras, one dilemma. Negotiating romance in a world that often has other priorities. In both medieval Europe and our fast-paced 21st century, people have grappled with balancing personal feelings against external expectations. From hand-stitched love tokens delivered under watchful eyes to swiping right on a smartphone screen at midnight, the quest for connection echoes across centuries. Though the trappings differ, courting songs sung in candlelit chambers versus text messages shot into the digital void, the underlying dilemma remains the same. How do we pursue love when social structures, family pressure, and economic realities press in on us? In this opening section, we'll explore how medieval courtship customs can shine a surprising light on modern dating challenges. By comparing these two eras, we can uncover common frustrations, learn from past mistakes, and perhaps gain clarity on why the simple act of finding someone to share our days and dreams can feel so complicated. We'll weave in real examples from today, like the awkwardness of "what are you doing?" texts at 2 a.m., side by side with tales of fathers haggling over dowries at dawn. Along the way, we'll sprinkle in practical takeaways that remind us. Whether you lived in a stone castle or a studio apartment, negotiating romance is rarely purely romantic. Medieval courtship, a world of watchful eyes. Picture yourself standing in a dirt-packed courtyard just before sunrise. You're a peasant in a small village somewhere in 14th century England. Thick mist clings to the thatched roofs of modest cottages. Your heart skips a beat as you spot the miller's daughter approaching the well. You might long to offer a kind word, perhaps even a small bouquet of wildflowers. Instead, you find yourself glancing over your shoulder because someone is always watching. Maybe it's your father, who paced out and agreed with her father yesterday that an extra goat could seal an engagement. Or perhaps it's old Father Saint Benedict, the local priest, who busies himself preaching on the dangers of flirtatious glances. Even if your eye meets hers for a fraction of a second, you know your every move is monitored by chaperones, cousins, aunts, neighbors on laundry duty. In medieval Europe, courtship wasn't casual. It was an economic, social, and religious dance choreographed long before the participants ever met. Falling in love for love's sake, almost unheard of. If you were a peasant, your marriage was negotiated by your parents, who had their own survival and stability in mind. Perhaps your family owned a small flock of sheep or a productive pig pen, and her family owned nearby fields of barley. A union between you two would merge resources, secure heirs, and strengthen community ties. Romance was an afterthought. In most cases, you and the girl might not meet until the morning of your wedding, when you stood side by side in front of the local priest, reciting vows in Latin you barely understood. For nobles, the stakes were even higher. Think of a young noblewoman, perhaps 14 years old, raised to recite courtly etiquette before she could read. Her marriage, perhaps betrothed at birth, was a strategic alliance between two powerful families. Grandparents finalized arrangements years before she ever glimpsed her future husband. Land, titles, and political favors took priority over whether she felt any spark when he bowed and handed her a single rose at their wedding ceremony. The idea of courting someone for months, exploring compatibility, or going on long walks to see where things go would have seemed naive, even laughable. For her, marriage was not a personal journey of self-discovery. It was a carefully negotiated contract, sealed with ink on parchment and witnessed by the local scribe. Yet even in this highly choreographed system, glimpses of human longing persisted. Maybe in secret, a young knight composed a humble verse on parchment for a lady's review, lines comparing her eyes to twin candles flickering in a darkened hall. He delivered it via a discreet page, knowing full well her confessor might read it aloud and glare disapprovingly at any hint of romantic impropriety. She might send back a ribbon tied to a sprig of lavender, scented to hint at her favor, even though social norms forced her to maintain an icy detachment. These tokens, gloves, ribbons, scribbled verses, became the medieval equivalent of flirty emojis, cryptic symbols of affection exchanged in whispered corners. Modern dating, the digital courtship maze. Fast forward to 2025, and we find ourselves in a very different landscape but confronted by strikingly similar challenges. Instead of arranged marriages, most of us in America believe in choosing our own partners. Yet so much about modern dating can still feel transactional, fraught with external pressure, and maddeningly ambiguous. Consider this familiar scenario. You're sprawled on your couch at 2 a.m. after a long shift, inexplicably texting someone, "Hey, what are you doing?" You hit send and stare at the screen, heart fluttering. Did you come across as too eager? Do they even care? Will they respond, or worse, will they ghost you altogether? Dating apps offer a paradox. Infinite potential matches, yet constant decision paralysis. Swiping right becomes its own ritual, the digital version of glancing across that village well, but instead of chaperones, we have algorithmic matchmaking. The stakes feel high. Will that match with the perfect profile photo and the witty bio lead to a real connection? Or will you discover that behind the polished pictures lies a person who recited O. Henry stories but balks at meeting in person? Just as medieval suitors worried that an exchanged glove could be misinterpreted, modern daters fret that a flirty gift might send the wrong message, or that waiting 5 minutes or 5 hours to reply will brand you as not that into them. Despite the veneer of choice, cultural expectations still steer us. Family and friends often have opinions. Why aren't you in a relationship yet? Echoes the medieval question. When will you be married? There's also the financial angle. Paying for expensive first date dinners, splitting ride shares, or buying gifts to impress. Though we're not transferring livestock, budgets matter. The difference between a $15 coffee date and a $200 dinner can set a trajectory. Social media's ubiquitous highlights amplify that pressure, making single life anxiety feel more intense than ever. Two eras, one dilemma. In both medieval times and our modern age, pursuing connection means contending with external frameworks, whether they be a web of familial alliances or the invisible algorithm behind your dating app feed. That's the dilemma. We want spontaneity and genuine affection, but we live in systems that value social standing, financial stability, or even digital clout. People throughout history have wrestled with balancing personal desires against collective priorities. In the Middle Ages, that meant abiding by church law and economic necessity. Today, it means navigating ghosting culture and finding someone who's here for a good time, not a long time. Bio matches our own values. Understanding this continuity can be reassuring. If knights and peasants manage to sneak private glances, send coded messages, and risk scandal in pursuit of love, then our own fumbling through instant messages and bad first dates is part of a larger human story. We might not have to worry about chaperones or poetic handkerchiefs, but we still face miscommunications, misaligned expectations, and the constant question. How do we strike that balance between vulnerability and self-preservation? A real-life example, the first date text. Let's imagine a scenario from today's vantage point. Emma, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher in Chicago, has matched with James, an engineer living across town, on a popular dating app. They've exchanged texts for a few days, peppered with polite good mornings and mid-afternoon "What's up?" messages. At 10:47 p.m. on a Friday, James sends a simple, "Hey, want to grab coffee tomorrow?" Emma's heart races. She doesn't want to seem too eager, so she waits 45 minutes before replying, "Sure, Starbucks on State Street at 2. As she hits send, she worries. Is that too late? Did she seem disinterested? Will he ghost her? Now shift back to a medieval villager named Alfric. He's smitten with Hilda, who fetches water daily at dawn. Last night, he carved her a small wooden spoon with her initials and left it outside her home early this morning. Hilda finds it, wonders if it's meant as a sign of courtship or just a gift to a friend. She feels nervous. If she accepts the spoon, does that mean she's agreeing to an engagement? If she returns it, will Alfric's family withdraw their offer, leaving her parents scrambling for a more suitable match? She consults her father and the village priest. Both warn her that any romantic entanglement must be pre-approved. She tucks the spoon away, uncertainty knotting in her stomach. Though centuries apart, Alfric's carved spoon and Emma's delayed text share a core truth. In both cases, a small gesture carries outsized weight. In our digital age, that spoon becomes a gif or a meme. Yet the emotional stakes, fear of rejection, the desire to interpret hidden meaning, remain constant. Two eras, one dilemma. How do we convey our feelings without risking shame? economic loss, or the disapproval of peers? Clear motives versus hidden agendas. In medieval communities, marrying well meant inheriting property, forging alliances, and securing a family's future. Courtship was rarely for better or for worse in the romantic sense. It was for dowry or else. Brides and grooms became living contracts. Even expressions of personal affection, love poems scribbled in Latin, tokens sent at midnight, were permitted only within those transactional boundaries. The Church insisted on upholding moral order, condemning any unsanctioned intimacy. Lovers had to send their "I love you" in code, knowing full well that a chaperone or confessor might intercept and decide to punish them for lustful thoughts. Today, our motives are subtler, but pressure still runs deep. We want genuine connection, yet we weigh potential partners' social media presence, financial prospects, and compatibility scores. Our hidden agendas might include, "I need someone stable to split rent," or "I want a partner who can boost my social standing." Though we no longer haggle over goats or fields, we do evaluate profiles for career, education, and lifestyle. The economic transaction has shifted from livestock to lifestyle. From "How many cows do you bring?" to "Do you have a six-figure salary and a 401k?" Viewed side by side, the medieval and modern approaches differ in form but not in essence. Both involve astute calculations. Is this union beneficial? In medieval times, the benefits were explicit land and dowry charts tattooed into family ledgers. Today, they are implicit fidelity acts, combined bank accounts, promise rings with no formal contract. Recognizing these parallels encourages us to ask, are we choosing love purely from the heart? Or are we subtly factoring in social expectations at every turn? When love defies the script, both eras also celebrate stories of lovers who risked everything for passion. Emma, after her cautious texting routine, might decide to break the ice differently. She sends a short voice note at 11 p.m., admitting she's nervous but excited to meet James. She bypasses the back and forth "should I reply now?" analysis and opts for vulnerability. That spontaneity sometimes works, just as medieval lovers sometimes slipped away at festivals, where dancing among villagers replaced rigid chaperoned walks. In such lantern-lit gatherings, they exchanged flirty glances and gentle touches. A fleeting finger on a gauntlet, a whispered compliment about a particularly well-worn leather boot. These brief respites offered a shelter from the weight of contracts and alliances. In medieval legend, tales like those of Abelard and Heloise remind us that love can bloom in the most restrictive circumstances. Their secret letters brimmed with longing, platonic devotion, and intellectual companionship, even as the Church reprimanded them. When Heloise refused Bernard of Clairvaux's pressures, insisting on her own path, she became a symbol of defiance. In 2008, a modern-day parallel unfolded when a Wall Street executive and a rising art curator eloped in Venice against their parents' wishes. She valued creative partnership over financial security. He valued her insight over elite circles. They paid a price: strained family relations, social gossip, but discovered a deeper joy in mutual respect and authentic connection. Such stories remind us that human impulses for autonomy and authentic feeling can outlast, even outrank economic calculations and social edicts. Medieval brides who risked scandal to run off with their stable-bred love, and 21st century daters who bypass apps to orchestrate surprise. Right now, meetups both chose emotion over convention. Their courage teaches a simple lesson. Sometimes, the script isn't written for us, and following our hearts might upset a few expectations, but it can also lead to the most meaningful bonds. 2 eras, 1 lesson. Looking back at medieval courtship alongside modern dating, we see that people have always sought paths around rigid structures when love stirred within them. The technologies have changed, from wax-sealed letters to encrypted DMs, but the core challenge remains: how to make our feelings known without risking too much. In medieval society, that risk might mean public shaming, family ostracism, or loss of wealth. Today's risk might be ghosting, online ridicule, or discovering that you're financially entangled with someone who isn't trustworthy. What can we learn? First, patience and clarity matter. Medieval knights who waited months for a token to be interpreted properly often found their affection misunderstood or outright rejected. Similarly, waiting hours or days To respond on a dating app can send unintended signals. If you care enough to request a date, it's kinder and more effective to quickly confirm details rather than play elaborate mind games. Transparency reduces confusion, whether you're offering a carved wooden token or sending a calendar invite to meet at Starbucks. Second, a small gesture can carry enormous weight. In medieval times, a single glove or ribbon pinned to a knight's surcoat declared devotion to an entire feudal court. Today, that might be a well-timed text that acknowledges someone's late-night anxieties, or a thoughtful Spotify playlist curated with care. Recognize the power of these small signs. They pack emotional punch precisely because they require effort and vulnerability. A smooth bridge to medieval law and church influence. We've just scratched the surface of how medieval courtship reshaped romance. Understanding the economic constraints, social scrutiny, and church doctrines that governed personal relationships then helps us grasp why tokens and covert gestures became the only lifeline to genuine feeling. As we move into the next section, we'll dive deeper into the bedrock of medieval matrimony, the intersection of marriage law and church influence. There, we'll explore how canon law dictated who could marry whom, the mechanics of medieval contracts, and how and why the church wielded immense power over even the most private of hearts. With that context in place, we'll see more clearly how and why medieval couples navigated a world fixated on alliances and dowries. And perhaps by reflecting on these distant customs, we'll find fresh perspective on our own romantic dilemmas, reminding us once again that two eras, one dilemma: how to follow the heart when everything else demands attention. Two eras, one dilemma: charting the course of the heart when laws and dogmas stand in the way. In medieval Europe, the church wasn't merely a spiritual guardian. It was the ultimate matchmaker, marriage counselor, and divorce court judge all rolled into one. Canon law dictated who could marry whom, which alliances were permitted, and precisely how far two prospective spouses could be related before the union was considered illicit. Fast forward to today, and while we may no longer require a bishop's blessing or a papal dispensation, countless roles, legal, financial, even social media algorithms, still shape how we establish and dissolve romantic bonds. In both eras, the deep human desire for partnership bumps up against the sometimes rigid frameworks of authority. In this chapter, we'll look closely at medieval marriage law and the church's pervasive influence. We'll uncover how canon law defined kinship boundaries, choir boys and chaperones ensured moral conduct, and decrees emanating from Rome overruled even kings. Through warm, relatable examples, and a sprinkling of anecdotes, you'll see how medieval couples navigated these complexities, learned from missteps, and sometimes carved out spaces of genuine love despite the iron grip of doctrine. And as always, we'll draw parallels to our own time, because if you think waiting days for a first reply is stressful, imagine waiting for a bishop's decreed dispensation to clear your marriage impediments. The church as gatekeeper, canon law and consanguinity. Two eras, one dilemma: love freely chosen versus love legally recognized. In medieval Europe, the church's hand reached into nearly every aspect of daily life: diet, worship, penance, and especially matrimony. By the 11th century, marriage had become a sacrament, a sacred covenant not only between two individuals but also before God. That meant the church got to set the ground rules. One of the main battlegrounds was consanguinity, how closely two people could be related by blood and still marry. It wasn't enough to avoid marrying your first or second cousin. Canon law originally prohibited unions up to the 7th degree, an ancestry chart stretching back to great-great-great-great-grandparents. The rationale: too close a blood tie risked genetic problems, yes, but it also threatened the social order and the church's moral authority. To marry within prohibited degrees required a written dispensation from the bishop or even the Pope himself. Imagine a young couple, Simon and Matilda, in 12th century Burgundy. They grew up in the same manner, their families forging strong ties for decades. When Simon felt his stomach flutter every time Matilda passed by the well, he thought he'd struck gold. Unfortunately, a genealogist, often called a cartulary scribe, traced their lineages back and discovered they shared a great-great-grandparent that placed them in the 5th degree of kinship, 2 degrees beyond what the church permitted. Their families had to petition the local bishop for a dispensation. a process that might take months or even years, complete with fees and prayers. Meanwhile, Simon and Matilda lived in a state of suspended hope, postponing any notion of a wedding until the church gave its blessing. For nobles, these consanguinity roles carried enormous political weight. In 1092, King Philip I of France attempted to divorce his wife Bertha because they were deemed too closely related. The Pope ultimately excommunicated Philip for defying the church, illustrating that even kings bowed to canonical decrees. Today's parallels might be easier to spot if we recall couples in the modern United States who discover, through genealogy acts, that they unknowingly share a common ancestor. While state laws rarely bar you from marrying a distant cousin, the shock of realizing you're related to your partner can derail all romantic momentum. Our impediments today may be a bit more relaxed, but they can still cause emotional upheaval. Handfasting, betrothal, and formal contracts. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Crafting a ceremony of love versus meeting legal requirements. Once Simon and Matilda navigated the consanguinity hurdle, either by securing a dispensation or finding they were just outside forbidden degrees, they still needed formal steps to make their marriage valid. Unlike today's I do moment often preceded by a less binding engagement ring, medieval unions unfolded in 2 distinct stages: betrothal, sponsalia, and consummation, matrimonium. Betrothal was not mere promise. It was a legally binding contract. Even saying the words "I betroth you" in front of witnesses made a future divorce practically impossible without church intervention. Take the case of Eleanor of Aquitaine. As Duchess of Aquitaine, her marriage to Louis VII of France in 1137 was a dynastic masterstroke, cemented by elaborate betrothal ceremonies and sealed with precious gifts of land and jewels. But when Louis sought an annulment in 1152, citing consanguinity through the 4th degree as the excuse, the church granted it, allegedly, on grounds that the marriage had not produced a male heir. The political fallout was seismic. Eleanor's lands reverted to her family, and she famously wed Henry II of England weeks later. In this example, betrothal had functioned as a real contract, but the annulment showed how malleable those contracts could be when powerful figures waved enough coin and influence. For commoners, the handshake in front of local witnesses still had weight. Suppose a blacksmith named Aldwin promised his sweetheart, Winifred, "In the name of God, I shall make you my wife." Such a vow, delivered publicly, could be recorded by the village priest. That simple exchange meant that if Aldwin later tried to marry someone else, the church could step in and force a repudiation or penance. Betrothal was no casual affair. It was good as gold. By contrast, many of us today date for months or years before booking a single appointment with a justice of the peace. If we promise forever in the modern sense, there's rarely a legal seal on it until we file a marriage license at City Hall, often just a few days before a wedding. Those who break off engagements generally face little more than disappointment, whereas in medieval times, breaking a betrothal could lead to ecclesiastical fines or public penance. Impediments and dispensations. Seeking Rome's permission. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Waiting on permission versus being free to choose. We've already touched on consanguinity, but it was far from the only obstacle. Canon law also prohibited marriage for those who had taken holy orders. Minors under the age of puberty, roughly 14 for boys, 12 for girls, and parties already bound in another marriage. The church viewed marriage as a sacrament that needed sanctity and proper intent. Neither partner could be wholly coerced, yet they also had to obey certain roles laid out in elaborate church canons. Real-life drama often arose when a pope's dispensation became the difference between a couple living hand-in-hand or being forced apart. Consider the story of Joanna of Flanders, sister of Duke John IV of Brittany. In 1337, she sought papal dispensation to marry Charles of Blois. They were related in the 4th degree and so needed permission. Filing the petition meant waiting months while the papal chancery process scribes invoices. Weighed political factors, Joanna's marriage would shift alliances, and ultimately made a decision that rippled through French politics. In that time, both Charles and Joanna stood in limbo, unsure if their union was meant to be. When Pope Clement VI finally granted the dispensation, it wasn't just a love story fulfilled, it was a strategic alliance endorsed by the highest ecclesiastical authority. Modern comparables might include visa applications for crossing borders to marry, couples face months of bureaucratic scrutiny before a government stamps their application. While we don't pray at altars for matrimonial licensure, waiting for visas can feel similarly nerve-wracking. Two hearts tied to the hope that paperwork will come through, just as Simon and Matilda waited for a dispensation to transcend prohibited kinship. Today's international couples wait for embassies to love stamp their love with a gleaming, approved seal. The role of local clergy, from sermons to surveillance. Two eras, one dilemma. Trusting local guidance versus fearing overreach. Parish priests functioned as the front line of ecclesiastical authority. They recorded baptisms, kept registers of betrothals, and, crucially, oversaw moral conduct. In many villages, the priest held more power over personal lives than the secular lord did. When a couple proposed marriage, they had to be publicly announced, bannsing, for 3 Sundays in a row. These bans allowed anyone to come forward with objections, whether on grounds of hidden kinship, previous vows, or worse, suspected immorality. If someone doubted the couple's eligibility, they could speak up, and the priest would investigate. Sometimes, sieves of rumor and innuendo slowed true love to a grinding halt. Imagine Ealdred, a yeoman in a 12th century Northumbrian parish, planning to wed his childhood sweetheart, Ethelwyn. The bans are read on 3 consecutive Sundays. On the second Sunday, old Sigebert, the town gossiper, suspects that Ealdred's sister had once nursed Ethelwyn as an infant, an obscure blood tie that might place them in the prohibited 7th degree, or so Sigebert claims. The priest, bound by duty, records this objection, calls forth both families, and demands proof. Ancient land records, testimonials from elderly kinsmen. The process drags on for weeks. Ethelwyn frets. If the bans fail, she might be forced to remarry someone else, per her father's wishes. Their families scramble to produce genealogical charts, oaths, and local witnesses. A priest's suspicion or Sigebert's gossip can unravel a life's dream in days. Fast forward to today's modern prelude to marriage, and we see echoes of bans. Our version of Announce Your Wedding might involve posting your engagement ring photos on Instagram or sending save-the-date cards. Instead of listening for objections in a church aisle, we field comments on social media. Sometimes well-meaning friends remind us of a painful ex from years ago, stirring doubts. Background checks for prenuptial agreements can turn up skeletons. Unpaid debts, legal disputes, or prior marriages. While we no longer wait for a priest's official all clear, we might wait for Aunt Linda to like our engagement post and drop a comment of congratulations, before feeling wholly comfortable announcing it to a wider circle. The arena has shifted from the nave to the newsfeed, but the underlying dynamic, public scrutiny before personal commitment, remains surprisingly similar. Canonical courts and annulment. When love goes awry. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Facing a broken union versus finding freedom to start anew. Once 2 individuals were wed in the church's eyes. Dissolving the union was no simple "I'm done." Divorce, as we understand it today, didn't exist. The Catholic Church considered marriage indissoluble unless a technical flaw could be proved, such as lack of consent, consanguinity, prior vow, or failure to consummate. That meant seeking an annulment, which declared that a valid marriage had never existed in the first place. These proceedings unfolded in ecclesiastical courts, and could be as long and fraught as the original betrothal. Take the high-profile example of King Philip II of France, whose wife, Ingeborg of Denmark, refused his advances. Philip sought annulling their marriage on grounds of consanguinity. He claimed they were too closely related, even though they'd secured a dispensation at the outset. The Pope resisted at first, concerned about political fallout and the precedent of royal caprice. Ingeborg endured years of exile, rumor of mistreatment before the church forced Philip to restore her status. That saga illustrates how flexible or inflexible canonical courts could be when dealing with powerful figures. For commoners, annulment processes could be equally grueling and humiliating, albeit without political flash. Suppose that Aldwin, our hypothetical blacksmith, discovered after a year of marriage that Winifred had been previously betrothed to his apprentice, a prior promise that invalidated the union. He brought the case before the local bishop's court, presented witnesses, sworn affidavits, and a heap of coins as fees. Annulments might require captive testimony from family members who held grudges. In many cases, entire villages knew more about the couple's private struggles than the couple did themselves. Accusations of impotence, hidden kin ties, or broken vows all became fodder for right gossip. Even after an annulment, Winifred might be labeled the woman who sent 2 husbands to the court, leaving her reputation damaged and choices narrowed. Today's no-fault divorce laws stand in stark contrast. A simple declaration that irreconcilable differences exist often suffices to dissolve a marriage. While lingering financial or child custody disputes remain, there's no need to produce evidence of consanguinity or prior vows. Yet our modern system carries its own emotional toll. Years of alimony hearings, custody battles, or court-granted restraining orders. The core dilemma is remarkably alike. How to end a partnership gracefully when legal and emotional binds still tangle the heart. Pilgrimages of the heart, synthesizing law and desire. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Obeying external rules while honoring inner yearning. Even when marriages were perfectly legal and blessed, medieval spouses still wandered through landscapes of longing, frustration, and occasional rebellion. Pilgrimages, journeys to holy shrines, offered both an escape and a chance to seek divine intervention in personal affairs. A knight might vow to visit Canterbury if his marriage proved fruitful. A woman might trek to Santiago de Compostela praying for fertility. In this way, private desires found a sanctioned outlet within the church's framework. Similarly, today's couples might take relationship retreats or weekend getaways aimed at rekindling their bond. They book counseling sessions or attend couples workshops. Though the setting is secular and the barbs of canon law absent, the impulse remains consistent, to seek blessing and clarity beyond everyday constraints. Just as medieval couples look to distant shrines to resolve earthly heartaches, we attend seminars, couples therapy, even weekend mindfulness retreats to heal or strengthen our bonds. Nonetheless, the church's role in medieval marriages was both gatekeeper and guardian. When a union thrived legally but withered emotionally, it still stood as a holy institution, often until death did them part. Our modern system may allow us to sever ties more easily, but that ease doesn't erase the pain or complexity of unwinding those ties. The quest to balance personal authenticity with the demands of a larger institution, whether the church in 1200 or the jurisprudence in 2025, still inspires pilgrimages of the heart. 2 eras, 1 lesson. Several lessons emerge when contrasting medieval marriage law with today's norms. First, clarity and understanding of the rules, whether canonical or civil, can save years of heartache. Simon and Matilda's agonized wait for a papal dispensation could have been partially mitigated if their families had mapped their genealogies earlier. Likewise, Emma and James's modern dating turmoil might ease if they were transparent about their expectations. Texting promptly, talking openly about financial or familial pressures, before emotions ran too wild. Foreknowledge of the roles of engagement always helps. Second, public scrutiny, whether through bans in a parish or through social media, is a double-edged sword. It can protect partners from missteps, e.g., discovering hidden impediments, but also magnify mistakes, shame, and gossip. In every era, finding a private space for honest communication is vital. Medieval couples sometimes quarreled in public square. Today we fight on group chat. Neither approach is free of witnesses. Cultivating trust away from the prying eyes, village neighbors or online followers, allows us to explore our bond without fear of immediate judgment. A smooth bridge to dowries and economic alliances. As we move from the realm of canon law to the ledger books of family treasuries, a new dimension of medieval marriage unfolds. Economics. Canon law established who could marry, but dowries, bride prices, and formal contracts dictated how and whether a marriage would happen at all. In our next section, we'll dive into the world of economic alliances. How families calculated livestock, linen, and coins, and how those financial negotiations shaped relationships just as decisively as papal bulls. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Balancing the heart's yearning with the ledger's demands. Let's turn the page to explore how medieval couples and their modern counterparts have made love work within the constraints of both law and economy. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. weighing matters of the heart against the demands of the ledger. Whether you're a young couple in 12th century France or two professionals in 2025 America, financial considerations inevitably shape romantic decisions. In medieval Europe, that reality took the form of dowries, bride prices, and meticulously negotiated contracts. Fast forward to today, and although we may not barter goats or bolts of cloth, we still make major financial decisions. Think ring budgets, wedding costs, joint bank accounts, and prenuptial agreements that can determine whether a partnership thrives or crumbles. In both eras, love and money are inextricably linked, and navigating those ties can feel as tricky as deciphering a lover's cryptic token. In this chapter, we'll explore how medieval families used dowries and bride prices to cement alliances, how those agreements were recorded in writing, and how couples, noble and peasant alike, muddled through the emotional fallout when economic realities collided with romantic dreams. We'll draw modern parallels to engagement rings, prenuptial contracts, and the cost of a destination wedding. And as always, we'll end with a simple takeaway. Money may not buy love, but it certainly buys influence over who you marry. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Can you honor your feelings when someone's cobbling together livestock, linens, or a hefty bank account to secure your future? Dowries and bride prices, medieval mechanics. Imagine a peasant family in 13th century Normandy. Thomas, a humble carpenter, has fallen for Marguerite, a farmer's daughter. From his first glimpse of her carrying eggs to market, he's smitten. But in medieval society, love alone won't win a wedding. At age 14, Marguerite's father announced that any suitor must provide a dowry, a modest sum of coins, perhaps a cow or two, and some bolts of flax linen. That dowry serves several purposes. It secures Marguerite's security in case Thomas dies young, it demonstrates the seriousness and financial stability of Thomas's family, and it uplifts her family's social standing. Meanwhile, Thomas's own parents pore over their meager savings, calculating how many hens they can sell at market, whether they should borrow a goat from next door, or if they can offer that chestnut mare inherited from Thomas's grandfather. In contrast, when a noble marriage takes place, the dowry looks more like an investment portfolio. Take the wedding of Eleanor of Provence to Henry III of England in 1236. Eleanor's father, Raymond Berenger IV, Count of Provence, prepared a dowry that included vast tracts of land in Provence, a fleet of merchant ships, and a chest rumored to contain gold coins stuffed into silk-lined pouches. That dowry not only enriched the English crown but also tied Provence's political fortunes to those of England. Had Eleanor's dowry failed to materialize, the entire alliance would have broken, reshaping power dynamics across Western Europe. Conversely, some cultures practiced a bride price, which is essentially the reverse. The groom's family pays the bride's family. In parts of medieval Sicily, influenced by Islamic and Byzantine customs, a young man might offer a herd of sheep in exchange for his bride's hand. That payment recognized the loss of labor the bride's family would endure. She no longer fetched water, tilled the fields, or tended sheep for them. In essence, the bride price compensated them for the gift of her work. If Thomas, our Norman carpenter, lived in that Sicilian context, he might have to guarantee a couple of sheep instead of requesting a dowry. Then, Marguerite's father would effectively be selling her labor to Thomas's workshop. Both dowries and bride prices acted as a form of social insurance. For women, who often lacked independent legal standing or property rights, a dowry was a measure of security in widowhood. If Thomas were to die in a workshop accident, Marguerite could fall back on the dowry items, selling cattle, renting out land, or trading linen, to support herself. That mattered, since widows in medieval Europe were often left without guardianship or recourse. A generous dowry could spare a widow from destitution or forced remarriage to a distant cousin. For families, economic alliances were not only about security but also about status. Among merchant families in 14th century Florence, dowries became a point of public pride. The Cerci family's records show that when Messer Vieri di Cerci married his daughters, he paid dowries large enough to fund his tannery business for months. Everyone in Florence knew that a hefty dowry signified a household's wealth and power. In that world, brides with no dowry, or a scant one, often remained spinsters as families deemed them too costly to marry off. Even peasants, whose dowries might consist of a few coins or a barrel of ale, were subject to communal pressure. If Marguerite's family scraped together only 2 coins and a couple of geese, village gossip could brand Thomas as taking poor Marguerite without offering enough. That social condemnation carried weight. If Thomas refused to increase the dowry, Marguerite's father might compel her to wed a wealthier shoemaker who could provide 3 cows instead of 1. Thus, even in a world without vast estates, livelihood concerns sparked marriage negotiations at every social level. Written contracts, from parchment to prenup. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Trusting spoken vows versus binding legal documents. Once dowries and bride prices had been negotiated, medieval families formalized the arrangement with meticulously drafted contracts. Writs on parchment sealed with wax, meticulously copied by scribes. These documents spelled out exactly what each party contributed. A dowry of 10 sheep, 20 bushels of wheat, and a silver salt cellar for the bride. A promise to build a house over 2 years for the groom. Occasionally, clauses ensured that if the husband died within a certain time frame, the bride's family could reclaim part of the dowry. These contracts, registered in ecclesiastical or manorial courts, carried the force of law. Breach them, and the aggrieved party could sue for restitution or worse, suffer excommunication or fines. Let's return to Eleanor of Provence. Her marriage contract, negotiated by papal legates, stipulated that if she outlived Henry III, she could retain control of 100 knights' fees, plus an annual allowance. That provision wasn't a courtesy. It was a safeguard dictated by canon law and reinforced by English custom. When Henry died in 1272, 3 decades later, Eleanor received precisely what the contract promised. Countless medieval widows, however, discovered those promises broken when new regents ignored the fine print. Without a written contract, their dowries often vanished into the royal coffers or the hands of powerful nobles. Modern parallels abound. We might think of engagement rings not merely as sentimental tokens but as symbolic contracts. In many U.S. states, rings fall under the category of conditional gifts, requiring a return of the ring if the marriage doesn't happen. Consider Jenna, who accepted a $5,000 diamond engagement ring from Mark. When Mark and Jenna later discovered they had irreconcilable differences and called off the engagement, Mark legally reclaimed the ring. Their attorney's view mirrored medieval contract law. Without a wedding day, the ring reverted to its giver. Though we don't draft 4-page clauses detailing livestock or land parcels, modern courts often interpret engagement ring disputes through the lens of gift-giving agreements. Similarly, prenuptial agreements function like medieval marriage contracts. In 1520s Venice, a writer named Francesco di Bernardo Guardi noted that wealthy merchants insisted on detailed prenuptial clauses. Should my bride conceive before the second summer, I shall provide for her house and child. Otherwise, her dowry shall revert to my family. These documents protected family assets and defined inheritance disputes, much like the modern prenup. Today, couples often negotiate alimony caps, property division, and business valuation in prenuptial agreements. Although the numbers may be larger, the principle remains. Both parties seek to clarify financial rights and responsibilities before tying the knot. Noble alliances, prestige meets practicality. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Marrying for love versus marrying for status. Nowhere were economic alliances more pronounced than in aristocratic marriages. Picture a 14th century English manor. Lady Matilda Fitzalan is set to marry Sir Robert de Neville. Before the wedding, envoys from both households convene in the Great Hall, parchment scrolls unfurled across an oaken table. The Fitzalans promise a dowry of 1,000 marks, a string of pearls, and a vineyard on the outskirts of London. In return, the nobilis agree to grant Matilda an income of £100 per year should Sir Robert die. Witnesses from both sides, priests, knights, and even a handful of townspeople signed, sealed, and swore to uphold the contract. The Fitzalans and nobiles didn't know whether Matilda and Robert would love each other. They likely spent little time together before the ceremony. Instead, their marriage was a strategic alliance, combining estates, consolidating power in the north of England, and ensuring mutual military support. If conflict arose, say with the Percys over contested lands, both families would stand united. In that sense, alliances resembled modern corporate mergers. Align resources, minimize competition, and maximize combined strength. In 1533, King Henry VIII famously broke from that pattern when he married Anne Boleyn. Despite wanting an annulment from Catherine of Aragon on personal grounds, his advisors warned that severing ties with Spain could invite war. Henry gambled everything: his throne, his church, to wed Anne. His dowry was a new Church of England. Within a few years, that alliance had unleashed religious upheaval and economic transformation across Britain. In 2025 America, albeit on a smaller scale, some couples approach marriage with similar calculations. Tech entrepreneur Sarah and finance executive Elijah negotiated a partnership agreement before moving in together. They listed their assets, Sarah's digital media startup shares and Elijah's investment portfolio, and drafted clauses outlining how to handle equity if they separated. Friends teased them, "Are you sure you want an Excel sheet before your first vacation together?" Nonetheless, Sarah and Elijah recognized that love stories don't always outrun financial realities. Their modern dowry was venture capital, and their contract wasn't sealed with wax. It was an e-signed document stored in the cloud. Yet, like Matilda and Robert, they believed clear financial understanding could safeguard affection from unforeseen disputes. Peasant pragmatism, love in the commons. Two eras, one dilemma. Dreaming of romance versus focusing on survival. While noble families conducted elaborate negotiations by tapestry-lit candlelight, rural peasants faced a simpler yet equally urgent dilemma: merging two small holdings to survive. In an English village in 1300, Humphrey the ploughman was courting Agnes, a farmer's daughter. Their families called a meeting at the open marketplace. The farm where Agnes lived produced hearty drinking ale, capable of supporting two families. Humphrey's father offered a dowry of 2 fat sheep and a share of the family's beehives. Honey was a valuable commodity. In return, Humphrey promised to teach Agnes sustainable crop rotation, ensuring more robust yields for both households. This marriage had to work not just socially but economically. If they miscalculated, say, offering too many sheep, Humphrey's family might sink into debt. If too few, Agnes's family might force her into a match with a wealthier shepherd. Their contract would be whispered and witnessed in the local tavern, over mugs of bitter ale, rather than consigned to parchment. They didn't need a royal archivist to record their agreement. Everyone in the village remembered who brought what to the wedding feast. Yet, just as in aristocratic circles, dowries among peasants ensured the continuity of work and the distribution of resources. Today, many young couples similarly conflate love with economic partnership. Consider Josh and Emily, a recently engaged couple living in suburban Atlanta. Both were burdened with student loans, credit card debt, and the rising costs of rent in a gentrifying neighborhood. Before setting a date, they sat down to list their combined expenses: rent, utilities, car payments, and grocery bills. They asked themselves, could they afford to buy a house? If they moved in together first, how would each contribute to the monthly costs? Their dowry wasn't sheep or honey. It was good credit scores, stable jobs, and a modest savings account. They drafted a spreadsheet under warm lamplight, projecting expenses for the next 5 years, negotiating how they'd split costs between Emily's design work from home and Josh's tech startup salary. Although they lacked formal contracts signed by witnesses, their household budget functioned as a binding agreement. Much like Humphrey and Agnes, Josh and Emily understood that love meant building a shared economic foundation. A few miscalculations, unexpected medical bills, or layoffs could unravel their best intentions. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Can affection alone keep a household afloat when the rent is due? Negotiation, disputation, and social pressure. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Bargaining in private versus navigating public scrutiny. Medieval marriage bargains often showed up in local courts or during harvest festivals. Any gathering where extended kin might weigh in. If Agnes's father felt jilted, say if Humphrey tried to pay less than promised, he could bring the dispute before the manorial lord or the parish priest. That conflict might involve public declarations, humiliating fines, or even the threat of disinheritance. Social pressure worked as an informal enforcement mechanism. No one wanted to be labeled a dishonest father or a stingy groom. Likewise, modern couples broadcast their financial choices on social media, exposing them to well-meaning and sometimes judgmental opinions. When 29-year-old local journalist Maya posted on Instagram, "Can't believe we spent over $30,000 on a wedding in Brooklyn," she received a flood of comments. "Splurge on love," one friend gushed. "Downgrade to an Airbnb party and keep the money for a house," another chided. Suddenly, Maya found her private financial decision thrust into the public forum. Just as medieval families resisted relatives who tried to lowball a dowry, modern couples debate whether Yelp reviewers' opinions should influence their bride and groom cake cost or DJ budget. In both contexts, the question emerges: how do you honor familial or societal expectations without compromising your relationship's authenticity? In medieval times, a bride with a below-market dowry risked gossip and reduced prospects. Today, a couple that skips the traditional white wedding might face raised eyebrows from parents and relatives. Social norms change more slowly than credit scores, and we see echoes of medieval bargaining tables in modern group chats where aunts and uncles weigh in on cake flavors. 2 eras, 1 lesson. As you've seen, medieval dowries and bride prices were not merely archaic relics but vital financial underpinnings of marriage, just as ring budgets, prenuptial clauses, and household budgeting shape modern unions. One simple lesson emerges: transparency and fairness are the core ingredients of a lasting partnership. Whether Teresa the Noble or Thomas the Carpenter, medieval couples who openly communicated what each side would bring, livestock, linens, or labor, laid stronger foundations for their marriages. In 2025 America, couples who discuss, and occasionally compromise, on wedding costs, living expenses, and future savings tend to weather financial storms with less rancor. A smooth bridge to courtly love and gestures of affection. With medieval marriage contracts and dowry negotiations unpacked, we've seen how families and social structures prioritized economic security sometimes at the expense of personal feelings. But medieval courtship wasn't all ledgers and haggling. In our next section, we'll explore the realm of courtly love, the poetic, clandestine world where knights pledged devotion to distant ladies and secret tokens served as medieval text messages. We'll discover how even in a system so deeply transactional, individuals found ways to express genuine affection, elevate personal longing, and occasionally challenge the status quo. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Striving for heartfelt connection in the shadow of apprenticeship contracts, dowry pacts, and parchment pages. Let's step into those candlelit chambers next, where longing and lyricism intersected in ways that still resonate with our modern quest for romance. Number 4. Courtship and courtly love. Myths, poetry, and mistakes. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Longing for genuine connection within a framework that insists on decorum and limitation. In medieval Europe, the notion of courtly love transformed how knights and ladies expressed desire through lofty poetry, vague tokens, and romanticized suffering. Fast forward to 2025, and social media platforms, dating apps, and carefully curated Instagram feeds shape modern courtships. Despite the centuries and technologies between us, both eras grapple with balancing authentic feeling against public expectation and rigid social codes. In this chapter, we'll look at how courtly love arose as a quasi-religious exercise in chivalry, how myths around exalted affection intersected with real human mistakes, and what lessons we can draw when our own DMs and scene receipts feel as fraught as quill pen manuscripts. We'll weave in stories of Abelard and Heloise, Eleanor of Aquitaine's poetic patronage, and modern analogues, those midnight texts that feel infinitely more awkward than any troubadour's verse. And through it all, we'll remember 2 eras, 1 dilemma, yearning for intimacy in environments that prize form over feeling, how courtly love began, from troubadours to troubled longing. Imagine a scene in 12th century southern France. Warm sunlight filters through the leaves of an oak courtyard. A young troubadour, Guillaume IX, Duke of Aquitaine, has just finished reciting a verse praising the beauty of his beloved, though she's likely married to someone else. In the glittering court, ladies and knights look on with rapt attention. This is courtly love, a cultural phenomenon that emerged among Occitan poets, valuing ennobling suffering over pragmatic unions. Instead of arranging marriage for land and power, knights pledged devotion to unattainable ladies, composing odes to their sublime virtues. To the average peasant or merchant, this concept must have seemed bewildering. Why extol a woman you can barely speak to in a language of allegory that required decades of training to interpret? Yet for nobles, courtly love offered an acceptable outlet for romantic yearning within strict boundaries. No physical contact, no threat to marital contracts, and no disruption of social order. Knights sharpened their skills not only in battle but in poetic expression, declaring their hearts pierced by the lady's radiant eyes, sometimes comparing her laugh to angelic bells. Yet all of this was performed behind a veneer of decorum. The lady, often already wed to another lord, returned such overtures with ice-cold politeness or a token reply, perhaps a ribbon pinned to the knight's cloak, to sustain the ritual. Two eras, one dilemma. Cherishing idealized romance versus navigating obligations. In modern times, we might scroll through a social media influencer's feed, admiring their glamorous life, and send a wistful like. Yet we know that sending that like won't lead to true intimacy. Courtly love functioned similarly, a performative ritual that offered emotional nourishment but rarely yielded an actual union. Its roles, no consummation, no public scandal, no challenge to feudal alliances, ensured that the ritual remained symbolic. Real missteps and myths, when courtly love turned costly. Not every knight succeeded in maintaining the noble suffering script. Bernard de Ventadour, a famous 12th century troubadour, wrote passionately of a lady he called Joffre, praising her radiant hair, gentle demeanor, and moral purity. Rumor has it that he professed love so fervently that local gossips spread tales of clandestine meetings in the castle's shadowed hallways. The lady's husband fainted on the dais at court upon hearing whispers of this liaison. Whether the story is true or a poetic invention, it highlights how easily courtly love could slip into real scandal. Perhaps the most famous historical example is the story of Abelard and Heloise in 12th century Paris. Abelard, a brilliant philosopher and teacher, fell deeply in love with his student, Heloise. Their passion, spurred by Abelard's own poetic skill, led to a secret marriage and the birth of a son. When Heloise's uncle discovered the betrayal, he had Abelard castrated. Their story underscores how elevated language and yearning could crash into societal and familial taboos. Their letters, packed with eloquence and anguish, became legendary. They also remind us that romantic ideals can burn fast and leave real wounds. In modern parallel, consider the texting mistake that upends a budding relationship. Imagine Taylor, in New York City, carefully crafting a flirty message to someone they've known for weeks online. In a moment of distraction, they accidentally hit send on a private comment meant for a close friend, filled with sarcastic quips about this endless chase. The recipient takes offense, forwards the message to mutual friends, and suddenly Taylor's reputation is questioned. The court of public opinion convenes in group chats, not castle courtyards. Taylor's digital misstep echoes Bernard's misplaced verse. Heartfelt expression gone awry, leading to social fallout. Poetry, allegory, and the language of longing. Courtly love relied on a special vocabulary, metaphors of birds, flowers, and heavenly bodies. Jeanne d'Arc's contemporaries might have raised eyebrows at such flowery speech, but in courtly circles, the more ornate the verse, the more esteemed the poet. Troubadours like Raimbaut de Vaqueras wrote in Occitan, praising La Belle Sale Object, the beautiful object, with lines that compared her hips to ripening grapes and her virtues to a shining star. Manuscripts later copied these poems, spreading the ideals of chivalric devotion across Europe. Yet this stylized language often hid real emotion. When a knight wrote that his lady's azure eyes healed his warrior's soul, he may have felt that ache in his chest wherever she went. But he also understood that such profession had to remain carefully bounded. If he begged too publicly for her favor, he risked being labeled a fool of love, or, worse, accused of dishonoring her household. Thus, verses that to modern readers seem exaggerated or hokey were earnest attempts to navigate an environment where open expression of affection was both romantic and potentially dangerous. Today's equivalent might be the poetry of Instagram captions or Twitter threads. A user might write, "Her smile is like a sunrise that melts my darkest worries," accompanied by a filtered selfie. The language is hyperbolic, yes, but it fulfills similar functions: signaling devotion, performing vulnerability, and showcasing emotional depth. When those posts go viral, or if they're misread as sarcasm or as attention-seeking, they can spark backlash. The delicate balance between genuine sentiment and performative expression remains. Mistakes in courtly love. When ritual overrides reality. All too often, courtly love's roles generated confusion and heartbreak. Imagine Sir Roland, whose wife, Lady Isabeau, required absolute discretion. To prove his devotion, Roland sent a white silk handkerchief perfumed with rose oil. In his mind, the gesture said, "I worship you from afar," but Lady Isabeau's confessor interpreted the token as an invitation to unchaste acts. He publicly chastised her for encouraging sin and forced a confession in front of the entire household. Roland's carefully crafted token led to scandal, reinforced by misunderstandings of coded symbolism. Similarly, in modern dating, we often adopt emojis and cryptic memes to convey interest without outright saying, "I like you." Suppose Alex, in San Francisco, sends the fire emoji, a signal that their date, Jordan, is hot. But Jordan interprets it as an insult, thinking Alex is mocking their blog post about climate change. That misinterpretation spirals into awkwardness, and the budding relationship feels off-kilter. The lesson, as in Roland's case, is that coded signals can backfire spectacularly. Another common medieval mistake was believing that high poetry guaranteed real affection. Sir Gautier du Châtel recited a sonnet about Lady Clemence's heavenly gate for weeks, expecting a ribbon in return. But when Clemence finally sent a gold ring, an extravagant token, Gautier assumed it meant she reciprocated his feelings fully. In reality, the ring was her way of politely ending his advances. "Look, I honor you enough to offer fine jeweler's work. Now cease." Gautier's misreading of that gift as true romantic encouragement led to duels, ruined reputations, and a forced exile. Likewise, modern daters sometimes overinterpret a good morning text or a shared playlist as a definitive sign of long-term commitment. When those expectations go unmet, no proposal after 6 months, or no shared apartment after a year, resentment sets in. We'll send sentimental Spotify playlists or meme-heavy Slack messages, only to discover that our audible soul offerings are received as casual banter rather than heartfelt confessions. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. How can we trust that a token, silk handkerchief, or Spotify link actually means what we hoped? Reconciling ideals and reality. How courtly love influences modern romance. The legacy of courtly love lives on. In medieval times, knights and ladies were expected to maintain an aura of emotional suffering, an admirable sacrifice to prove devotion. Today, we sometimes see similar dynamics in long-distance relationships. The extended wait between visits becomes a badge of honor. If our love can survive 30 days apart, it's true love. We might share a photo of our empty bed and say, "Every night is a fortress against my yearning." That language mirrors medieval knights who composed laments by candlelight. My heart, a shattered vessel, longs for but a glimpse of her face. The tropes have shifted, but the emotional performativity persists. Yet blending idealized devotion with daily life often leads to mistakes if we let ritual trump authenticity. A 21st century example involves Sarah and Miguel, college sweethearts moved apart by graduate programs. Sarah began sending coded texts, heart emojis, inside jokes, hints at loyalty, expecting Miguel to proclaim undying love. Instead, Miguel took a month to respond frequently, juggling demanding coursework and part-time teaching. When Sarah visited, expecting a nightly welcome, she found Miguel exhausted and anxious about final exams. Her disappointment, fueled by months of poetic expectation, led to a public argument, captured in a viral TikTok. Fans debated who was in the wrong, showing how modern public displays of courtship can be misinterpreted under the glare of social media. In medieval times, these misunderstandings were confined to castle corridors and local gossip. Today, a tweet or Instagram story can amplify error to an audience of thousands. The core dilemma remains: between grand gestures and everyday reality, How do lovers communicate clearly without assuming too much? Medieval poets tried to elevate emotion to an art form. Modern daters often treat texting as an emerging art. Both approaches run the risk of losing sight of genuine feeling. A lesson in balance. Heartfelt expression meets honest communication. Two eras, one lesson. The noblest sentiment requires honest delivery. Medieval courtly love encouraged poetic license and secrecy. But when the language became too ornate or when coded gestures were misread, heartbreak followed. Knights who donned a lady's colors at tournaments might have expected a nod or a token in return. An unspoken agreement. When that agreement failed, reputations fell and love turned to rancor. In our century, using a flirty gif or a heart emoji isn't enough unless accompanied by clear, honest conversation. If you admire someone's intelligence, say so openly. Your insights on climate justice inspire me. Instead of waiting for a poetic metaphor to do the work, if you want to know whether they see a future, ask directly, rather than read too much into a delayed good morning text. Balancing expressive flair with straightforward communication encourages understanding over assumption. A smooth bridge to tokens and tokens missent. As our exploration of courtly love draws to a close, we've seen how myths, poetry, and mistakes shaped medieval romance, elevating emotion while sometimes obscuring reality. Just as knights risked misunderstanding when sending a perfumed glove, we risk it when sending an ambiguous text. Yet tokens, whether a ribbon tied to a sword or a meme sent across the internet, possess real emotional weight. In our next section, we'll delve deeper into the world of tokens, letters, and medieval texting. We'll see how sending a glove or a love poem required careful navigation of social codes, and how modern equivalents can be equally fraught. Two eras, one dilemma. Bridging desire and decorum through symbolic gestures, whether whispered in a courtly hall or tapped out on a touchscreen. Two eras, one dilemma. Conveying affection in a culture where every gesture is watched, coded, and can easily be misread. In medieval Europe, tokens and letters functioned as the social media of the age, small physical artifacts or handwritten verses that carried outsized emotional weight. Fast forward to 2025 America, and we too rely on emoji-laden texts, gifts, and means to communicate everything from "I miss you" to "I'm thinking of you." Despite centuries and technologies that separate us, both eras wrestle with uncertainty. Did my gesture land as intended, or did it spark confusion? In each case, something as simple as a ribbon pin to a cloak or a heart emoji in a midnight text can define the trajectory of a budding relationship or derail it. In this chapter, we'll dive into the mechanics of token giving and love letters in medieval times, examining who delivered them, how they were encoded with secret meanings, and the real-life heartaches that followed misinterpretations. Then, we'll draw parallels to our own digital courtship rituals, exploring how a GIF or an "I'm fine" sticker might be just as ambiguous. As always, we'll weave in stories of famous medieval lovers, Abelard and Heloise, Eleanor of Aquitaine's secret verses, and modern analogs like a poorly timed read receipt or a cryptic voice note. By the end, we'll see how the same core challenge exists across the ages. Two eras, one dilemma. Finding ways to speak from the heart without being crushed by unintended consequences. The mechanics of medieval tokens, gloves, ribbons, and more. Imagine a 12th century banquet hall in Champagne, France. The candles flicker against tapestries, and minstrels strum lutes in a corner. Among the crowd stands Sir Guy de Chaumont, nobly clad in velvet and chainmail, yet his heart races for Lady Alice, who sits with other noblewomen far across the hall. There's no direct way to approach her. Knights aren't allowed to speak to ladies without permission, and certainly not without the supervision of chaperones. So Sir Guy enlists his squire, a boy named Renaud, to deliver something small yet significant. A single white glove, perfumed with lavender and folded neatly into a small, embroidered pouch. Why a glove? As medieval etiquette evolved, certain tokens carried standardized meanings. A glove symbolized devotion and respect. Its very fabric, pressed against Sir Guy's hand after tournaments, carried a faint scent of sweat and steel. By perfuming it and sending it to Lady Alice, he meant, My thoughts of you linger beyond the battlefield. Even my calloused hand honors your grace. Renaud treads carefully through the throng and slips silently into the women's enclosure, a guarded space where any direct conversation would be scandalous. He places the glove on the table before her, bows deeply, and retreats, leaving Lady Alice to interpret the silent message. This ritual sending a glove was hardly unique. Knights romance poets like Chrétien de Troyes mention gloves as tokens, and troubadours describe the scent of my lord's leather as a delight. Yet these tokens were inherently ambiguous. Did Sir Guy mean to propose? Was the glove a mere sign of admiration? Could Lady Alice refuse without offense? The chaperones hover, cousins and aunts casting glances over shoulders. Any wrong move, slipping the glove to the wrong woman, or misunderstanding its purpose, could spark rumors of impropriety. Letters, written words behind parchment walls. Beyond tangible tokens stood the love letter, the medieval equivalent of our late-night DMs. Consider the story of Abelard and Heloise in 12th century Paris. Abelard, a brilliant theologian, found himself captivated by his student Heloise's wit, intelligence, and beauty. After a clandestine courtship, filled with stolen glances and secret meetings, he penned letters to her on parchment scraps. His words brimmed with artful Latin. My heart, once a fortress of reason, now trembles before the beacon of your gaze. For Heloise, reading those verses in the hush of night conveyed more than any spoken confession might. She wrote back, equally eloquent, layering their secret correspondence with layers of allegory and coded references to her family's chaperones. These letters passed through the hands of illiterate servants, monks, and scribes. Each intermediary risked perusing lines meant only for Heloise's eyes. When her uncle discovered their affair through one such intercepted letter, tragedy ensued. Abelard was castrated, Heloise forced into a convent. Their letters, however, lived on as classics of medieval literature, a testament to the power and peril of written communication. Not every letter ended in such dramatic consequence, but countless pairs of lovers used quill and ink to navigate social barriers. A knight stationed on the Crusader front might write to a lady in Provence, describing the scent of frankincense in camp and ending with a verse that read, As the dawn dispels the darkness, so does your smile banish my loneliness. In return, she might inscribe her response with folded edges, including pressed petals of orange blossom. Their letters exchanged code names, my noble stag or my silver moon, so that even if discovered, the meaning remained veiled to casual readers. Tokens and letters in action, real-life examples. It's one thing to describe tokens in theory, it's another to glimpse them in history. A particularly striking example comes from 14th century England. A glove, still preserved in a museum, embroidered with golden thread and scented faintly with rosewater. The glove's owner, Lady Eleanor de Clare, received it from her husband, Hugh Le Despencer, as part of a courtly wager after a tournament he won in 1320. Her acceptance of the glove signaled public approval of his victory, akin to saying, My favor rests on you this day. Yet when Hugh was executed in 1326 for treason, records show that town criers announced the seizure of all his assets, including that precious glove. In Lady Eleanor's retelling, she claimed it was a gift of devotion, whereas Hugh's enemies portrayed it as a symbol of his vanity. The glove's meaning shifted dramatically with the tides of political fortune, proving that even material tokens could be entangled in dangerous games. Another recorded case appears in a Norman chronicle. Sir Guillaume de Montfaucon sent Lady Sybil Courtenay a crimson ribbon pinned to his surcoat, scented by saffron. Sybil's cousin, acting as chaperone, immediately recognized the import. No soldier sent such a ribbon without seeking some favor in return, perhaps a promise of sponsorship in the tournament or a whispered commitment to pay off a debt owed by Sybil's family. Her cousin alerted Sybil's father, and a swift meeting convened. Sybil's father demanded that Guillaume either explain his intentions or risk punishment under duress of social disgrace. As it turned out, Guillaume simply meant to feast under Sybil's family patronage, an offer that carried its own political subtext. In other words, the ribbon was an open-ended message, and even when it didn't imply true romance, it forced Sybil's family to respond as if it did. In our modern world, we might compare these tokens to sending someone a Spotify playlist or a specially chosen emoji. For instance, a friend in Boston sends a curated playlist titled Songs That Remind Me of You to a classmate in Chicago at 2 a.m. The classmate, groggy, interprets it as more than friendship, assuming romantic interest, only to discover the playlist was a cheeky response to a shared inside joke about coffee shops. The ensuing awkwardness parallels the medieval scenario. A digital token meant playfully can quickly be misinterpreted, triggering social ripples that require damage control. Common pitfalls: when tokens and letters misfire. Tokens and letters possessed real emotional power but also carried high risks of misunderstanding. Consider Sir Hugo de Montmorency, who sent a small gold locket decorated with the entwined rose and thorn to Lady Mathilde de Blois. He meant it as a sign of chaste affection, his rose representing her beauty, the thorn her strength. But Mathilde, having recently endured a forced betrothal, read the locket as an illicit proposal. Rumors circulated that Sir Hugo sought to steal her away from her husband. She nearly faced charges of adultery simply for possessing it. Only after they published a formal statement clarifying his intent. "I honor my lady's virtue, and this locket is but a token of esteem," did the matter die down. Still, the damage lingered. Whispers in the court accused Mathilde of naivete or worse, of harboring forbidden treason. Modern daters experience similar snafus. Imagine sending a tongue-in-cheek meme implying, "I could write a 10-page essay on how amazing you are." If the recipient is new to your sense of humor, they might take it literally, expecting a formal letter or essay the next day, only to be disappointed when you reply with a simple LOL. The dissonance between expectation and reality can fracture trust. Medieval lovers learned this lesson repeatedly. When you send a perfumed glove, a jet-black raven feather, or a coded poem, you must be prepared for its possible misinterpretation and the wild rumors that might follow. Decoding medieval text messages, context and clarification. Just as our smartphones store context, read receipts, timestamps, previous conversations, medieval courtiers relied on context to decode tokens. A perfumed cloth sent at dawn carried a different connotation than one sent at sunset. A gift sent after a skirmish in battle had more weight than a trinket given at a lavish feast. Courtiers often included small annotations, like a knot tied in a certain way on the ribbon, to indicate the sender's emotional state or urgency. Consider the example of Lady Isabel de Lacy, who, in 1298, received a single golden earring from Sir Reginald de Clare while he was abroad in Gascony. Written on a scrap of parchment tucked inside the earring's box were the words, "When the west wind whistles through the oaks, remember the promise we made beneath those leaves." She understood implicitly. The west wind referred to their secret meeting under an oak grove outside the walls of Chester a year earlier, and promise meant he intended to return after the campaign to claim her hand properly. Yet to anyone else who found the letter, soldiers billeted at her family's manor, it would have sounded like a riddle, perhaps hiding treasonous messages exchanged with foreign powers. Because medieval scribes sometimes copied such love riddles into public chapels, pilgrims and priests greenlit by clerical authority often transcribed them without realizing their romantic import. Thus, Isabel's private note had to be delivered discreetly, just as we might use encrypted messaging apps today to send a sensitive confession. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Ensuring that coded messages reach their true recipient without being hijacked by unintended eyes. Modern equivalents include using Snapchat's disappearing messages or WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption to send something we want seen only by a specific person. But encryption cannot guarantee interpretation. Emojis and memes remain subject to the recipient's mood, cultural background, and current life stressors. A heart emoji can be interpreted as love, platonic warmth, or even sarcasm, depending on context. Medieval tokens were no different. Their meaning shifted based on who, when, and where. Voices on paper, prominent medieval correspondence. When thinking of medieval love letters, Abelard and Heloise's epistolary saga often comes to mind first. But other notable pairs illustrate the era's fascination with written romance. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II. As we saw earlier, Eleanor's marriage to Henry II came with sophisticated correspondence. While Henry was busy managing his continental empire, he wrote letters that praised Eleanor's political acumen as if she were the noblest of queens. She answered with poetry that equated his accents with winter's harshest chill. Though their marriage became fraught with rebellion and conflict, these letters revealed genuine affection, complicated by power struggles that transcended simple political calculation. Richard the Lionheart and Berengaria of Navarre. King Richard I of England famously married Berengaria during the Third Crusade, though records suggest they barely saw each other. Their letters, often composed by clerics under strict secrecy, speak of longing and devotion, yet nearly all of them were lost in transit, intersected by rival courts or simply consumed by time. The few surviving fragments, a line about my dearest dove, come perch in this nest of my longing, illustrate how even a crusading king relied on words to convey affection across continents. Marguerite de Navarre and Henri d'Albret. In the early 16th century, Marguerite, sister to King Francis I of France, penned passionate verses to Henri d'Albret, King of Navarre. Her letters blended elegant French with Occitan slang, referencing local folklore and shared childhood memories. When Henry's army reclaimed his kingdom, he sent a reply that read, "I return to you not only a throne but also a heart that beats only for you." Their love story, though less scandalous than Abelard and Heloise's, illustrates how written words fueled political alliances and personal devotion simultaneously. These correspondences remind us that tokens and letters served dual functions: personal confession and public performance. A letter might travel through the chanceries of multiple courts, be read by clerics, and end up archived in a cathedral scriptorium. The risk of exposure was ever present. In modern parallels, think of a private DM screenshot shared by a gossip account, splashed across zerodindaily.com. The intimate becomes public within minutes, just as medieval love notes could end up copied into church registers or preserved in monastic libraries for centuries. 2 eras, 1 lesson. Tokens and letters have always been double-edged swords. They let us whisper love, but carry the risk of being overheard. Medieval lovers discovered too late that a misdelivered glove or a wrongly worded line could unleash gossip, scandal, or worse. In our digital age, a poorly phrased DM or an unintended viewed receipt can create confusion just as acutely. The lesson is simple. When you choose to send a token, be it a leather glove or a heart emoji, recognize that its meaning will be interpreted through multiple lenses. Clarity, as rare as it may seem, is still our best armor against misunderstanding. A smooth bridge to social surveillance and chaperones. Having explored tokens, letters, and medieval texting, we see how physical and written artifacts carried complex meanings through layers of intermediaries. Yet these gestures never existed in a vacuum. They were embedded within a world of chaperones, nosy relatives, and moralistic clergy who monitored every gesture of affection. In our next section, we'll examine how medieval surveillance shaped courtship, how families, neighborhoods, and the church policed interactions, turning even the simplest flirtation into a high-stakes performance. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Navigating desire under watchful eyes, whether behind drawn curtains in a castle or behind the constant hum of social media notifications. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Balancing personal desire against the watchful gaze of family, community, and authority. In medieval Europe, every potential romantic encounter was shadowed by chaperones, relatives, and priests. Anyone could report a perceived indiscretion to the local lord or bishop. Fast forward to 2025 America, and our chaperones often wear the digital cloak of social media, group chats, and ever-present smartphone cameras. Despite the centuries and cultural trappings that separate us, both eras struggle with the same core tension. How can individuals explore affection when every interaction invites scrutiny? In this chapter, we'll unpack how medieval families and communities monitored courtship, how parents escorted daughters to the well, how priests preached against unsanctioned glances, and how village gossip could make or break young love. Then we'll draw parallels to our own time, where well-meaning parents track our location via apps, where every text can be screenshotted, and where a single misunderstood emoji can ripple through a friend group. We'll share warm stories, like a peasant girl's chaperone trip to the mill, and a modern teen's Snapchat slit, that highlight our endless negotiation between intimacy and oversight. And through it all, we'll remember two eras, one dilemma, wanting genuine connection under the microscope, the watchful eyes of medieval families and clergy. Imagine a small village in 13th century England at dawn. The sun peeks over thatched roofs, and smoke curls from chimneys. A young peasant girl, Millicent, is set to fetch water from the communal well, yet she cannot simply wander alone. Her mother, Aunt Edith, and older sister Maria accompany her, staying within arm's reach at all times. Villagers know that if Millicent's eyes linger too long on a strapping young miller's apprentice, tongues will wag by evening. Should the apprentice toss her a knowing smile, even silently, that exchange is reported to her father. He might scold her for impropriety, or worse, arrange an immediate marriage with an older man simply to protect her reputation. This was not because medieval households were unusually oppressive. Rather, they operated under the belief that family honor, social stability, and moral virtue hinged on controlling interactions between unmarried youths. Priests regularly reminded congregations during Sunday Mass of the dangers of lascivious glances and unsanctioned wandering hands. A chaperone's role was partly practical, ensuring Millicent did her chores rather than gallivanting, but largely moral, safeguarding the girl's virtue and her family's standing. For the nobility, this supervision intensified. Imagine Lady Eleanor of Brittany, age 14, preparing for a walk in the castle gardens. But that stroll is hardly solitary. Her mother, the Duchess, keeps two ladies in waiting within sight. Her uncle, a knight, patrols nearby. Even the bishop's chaplain sits on a stone bench pretending to read from a breviary, ready to intervene at a hint of scandal. Any unsupervised conversation between Lady Eleanor and a knightly suitor would be cause for immediate complaint to the lord of the manor, and possibly a trip to the episcopal court. Two eras, one dilemma. Yearning to glimpse a potential soulmate versus obeying the strictures of honor and propriety. In this environment, if Lady Eleanor's heart fluttered at the sight of Sir Roland's sun-dappled armor, she dared not reveal it. Instead, she might send a token, a ribbon pinned to her cloak, hoping a subtle hint escapes everyone's notice. Yet invariably someone would find the ribbon, infer its meaning, and share it at the next family feast. Lady Eleanor's reputation and possible alliances became a matter of communal discourse, not private affection. Surveillance by community and church authorities. Beyond immediate family, medieval villages thrived on tight-knit networks where everyone knew everyone else's business. If Millicent lingered too long at the well, neighbors would comment as they filled their buckets. "Did you see Millicent's eyes on that apprentice, Mick? I worry for her virtues." In an age without privacy as we conceive it, public spaces belong to the community. Any display of affection, however mild, a friendly brush of hands, a shared loaf of bread, risked gossip. That gossip rarely stayed in whispers. Before long, it fueled sermons from the pulpit. At Sunday Mass, Father Benedict exhorted parishioners, "Guard your daughters' hearts, lest they fall prey to worldly temptations." Parents, eager to demonstrate piety and moral rectitude, doubled down on supervision. A chaperone might accompany a group of young people to the harvest festival, ensuring dance partners remained respectful. If two youths seemed to share a lingering gaze or a secret dance step, the chaperone might interrupt, escorting one or both to fetch water. An unmistakable signal. No unsanctioned intimacy tolerated here. Political and ecclesiastical authorities reinforced such vigilance. In many parts of medieval Europe, local councils posted proclamations forbidding men and women from parking behind the abbey wall or meeting at the broken bridge without a third party present. Violators could face fines, penance, or temporary excommunication. For the nobility, ecclesiastical courts held secular power in matters of morality. Should a knight reach across a banquet table to brush Lady Isabeau's sleeve, that slight touch went on record. Even seemingly innocent gestures risked entangling families in scandal. Two eras, one dilemma. Safeguarding communal order versus nurturing personal affection. In a world without smartphones yet full of vigilant eyes, a medieval youth had almost no realm of privacy. Their letters were read by scribes, their tokens passed through servants, their dances watched by families. Many learn to confine longing to the heart, to write quatrains in secret or slip riddles under doors. Something like today's disappearing stories on social media. But just as a screenshot can immortalize a private Snapchat message, medieval scribes sometimes transcribed clandestine love sonnets into monastery archives, forever preserving what was meant for two. Modern echoes, digital chaperones, and public scrutiny. Fast forward to 2025 America. We no longer require Aunt Edith to escort us to the well, but we carry a different sort of chaperone, the smartphone. Consider Sarah, a college senior in Chicago, who introduces her new boyfriend, Marcus, to her parents via FaceTime. Her mother hovers over the conversation, asking, "What's his GPA? Where does he work?" Every detail is recorded on a cloud and possibly screenshot. Marcus feels as though every sentence is under microscope. Is he serious about her? Or is he cheating on someone else? The light of the screen illuminates more than their faces. It highlights every nuance, tone, hesitation, or smile, leaving little room for misinterpretation. This digital surveillance extends beyond parental curiosity. Social media, group chats, and mutual friends create an ecosystem where every text, photo, or emoji carries implications. If Sarah posts a series of photos with Marcus, tagging him in a romantic location, hundreds of acquaintances see the update. Comments appear within minutes. "Congrats! Finally, did you break up with your last guy?" The audience for any romantic gesture now spans networks, creating a sense of performance. When Sarah and Marcus decide to have a private conversation, they use encrypted messages, yet even those can be screenshotted. Should they disagree publicly on Twitter or TikTok, perhaps airing grievances or making offhand jokes, those remarks can circulate widely, judged by an audience far bigger than Aunt Edith's disapproving glance. Two eras, one dilemma. Pursuing private affection when digital tools magnify every move. In medieval times, a shy peasant called to a village announcer to relay a message. Now we press send and watch it potentially go viral. A modern couple might think they're texting each other in privacy, but group chats, mutual friends, and the platform algorithms themselves can leak or misinterpret those conversations. The modern chaperone may be an algorithm flagging certain keywords as suspicious or parents installing a Find My Phone tracker, ensuring their teen's location is never a secret. The tension remains. How to cultivate intimacy when watchers abound. Real-life scenarios. Chaperoned walk versus tracked location. Let's revisit Millicent's medieval scenario. She longs to share a whispered word with Mick, the miller's apprentice, as they cross paths at the well. But Aunt Edith and Maria flank her closely, ensuring no unsanctioned interaction. If Mick approaches, Aunt Edith demands, "Hugh, fetch your mother some eggs. We'll come back for your buckets later." Their gaze never falters. The chaperone system ensures propriety. Millicent might feel suffocated, wanting a moment alone with Mick, but she knows her reputation and future prospects depend on obedience. Now consider Jenna, a high school sophomore in 2025. She meets Leo, a transfer student, at a friend's house party. They exchange numbers and begin texting. One night, Jenna's parents install a location tracking app on her phone, reasoning, "It's for your safety." As Jenna tries to discuss a private meeting with Leo, maybe a group study in the library, her mother's notifications light up. Jenna arrived at the library. The promise of privacy dissolves. Jenna feels torn. She wants to share her life with Leo, but she knows her parents will watch every message. They might even check her read receipts. Did she read that last message at 2 a.m.? Did she respond at 3:15? The clock becomes a surveillance tool rather than a measure of time. Two eras, one dilemma. Forging authentic bonds when overseers hover. Both Millicent and Jenna must navigate layers of supervision. Millicent can rarely meet Mick alone without fear of scandal. Jenna can rarely text Leo frankly without parental visibility. As a result, both resort to coded language. Millicent might discuss her feelings only in the privacy of her grandmother's hut. Jenna might switch to a secret messaging app after school, hoping her parents won't notice. In both cases, the need for privacy spurs ingenuity but also fuels anxiety. If discovered, consequences could be severe. Clerical guidance and moral policing. While parents and chaperones monitored secular interactions, medieval clergy amplified that surveillance with sermons and moral edicts. If a young woman lingered too long near a knight's quarters, a passing monk might later reference it in Sunday homilies. Remember, brothers and sisters, the lure of temptation lies in lingering eyes. In many villages, invitations to gatherings were extended with warnings. Harsh punishment awaits any unsanctioned meeting at Lady Beatrice's wooden bridge. Confessors sometimes intersected love letters, adding their own annotations exhorting chastity or prohibiting certain gestures. When a priest instructed young women to walk 3 feet behind your father, he codified supervision as spiritual duty. Modern parallels appear in religious and cultural communities where moral codes remain stringent. In some households today, parents insist on chaperone dates in the form of family dinners. A modern twist: at 2025's communal iftar during Ramadan, an observant Muslim family might post a notice: young men and women must sit separately or have a mahram present. Though the details differ, the impulse echoes medieval clergy's calls to guard virtue. Group norms, whether announced by a cedarwood pulpits or WhatsApp broadcast messages, continue to shape how young adults can mingle. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Seeking guidance from religious authorities while craving personal agency. When a medieval girl hears the priest's fire and brimstone sermon, she may feel guilty for simply daydreaming. Similarly, a modern teen in a religious community who shares a flirty meme might be admonished for lacking modesty. Both individuals experience external pressure, one via Latin homily, the other via a family WhatsApp forwarded message, reminding them that courtship must adhere to communal prescriptions. Negotiating space for private communication. Despite heavy supervision, medieval youths often found loopholes for private conversations. During All Hallows' Eve festivities, when costumes and revelry blurred lines, chaperones sometimes relaxed their grip. In the chaos of communal dancing, passing around mead and spinning in harvest songs, young people could slip away under the guise of seeking more ale. Once off stage, they might share stolen kisses beneath the moonlit oaks. Of course, if caught, they risked public humiliation in the form of pillow banging or fines at the next market day. Yet these fleeting moments of unsupervised intimacy energized countless love stories. Similarly, modern couples carve out spaces of privacy in a hyper-connected world. Mia and Javier, 2 college juniors, know their dorm walls have thin insulation. They text each other from the campus library, where loud hum of readers masks their conversations. Sometimes they meet in the student lounge at its farthest corner, sharing headphones to watch a film on one laptop, cocooned from campus surveillance. Even so, the university's Wi-Fi logs might flag their consistent usage, prompting an automated email. Are you experiencing technical issues? The network detected continuous streaming of hot coffee breaks. If you believe this to be a mistake, please reply. The attempt at private communication becomes a data point tracked and questioned. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Carving private moments within public oversight. Medieval youths seized All Hallows' Eve to hide from chaperones. Modern couples slip off to headphone-shared screen time. The methods differ: wooden festal masks versus encrypted messaging apps. But the impulse remains. When the gaze grows too suffocating, we seek hushed corners. Yet even these corners can't guarantee complete privacy. A lesson in boundaries and honesty. 2 eras, 1 lesson. Trust and open communication can ease the burden of surveillance. Millicent might have whispered her feelings to her father before sneaking looks at Mick, thus transforming chaperone supervision into a shared family secret. His goodwill easing Aunt Edith's vigilance. Jenna could have discussed her relationship with her parents, explaining why she needed occasional privacy, reducing their urge to track every text. In both eras, transparency fosters trust. When families and authorities feel respected and involved, without controlling every detail, couples can navigate affection more freely. Medieval villagers who organized supervised mummers plays to allow youths to interact safely during festivals often reduced gossip and scandal. Modern parents who set clear guidelines, We trust you to come home by midnight. If you need help, call us. Tend to see fewer secretive missteps and more honest communication. Ultimately, supervision need not be stifling if it's rooted in trust rather than fear. A smooth bridge to rebellious love, elopements, scandals, and lessons. Having explored how medieval families, chaperones, and clergy surveilled every romantic gesture, and seen how modern digital chaperones echo that scrutiny, we reach a crossroads. What happens when individuals feel their desires crushed under the weight of oversight? Often they rebel. In our next section, we'll dive into tales of elopements and scandals, of medieval lovers who dared to defy parents and priests, and of modern couples who eloped to Vegas to escape social media's glare. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Risking everything for a chance at love unsupervised. Let's turn the page to witness how defiance reshapes romantic narratives, sometimes forging legendary unions, other times leaving lessons in heartbreak. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Choosing passion over protocol when every step toward love risks family wrath, social ruin, or worse. In medieval Europe, a young noble or peasant who dared to elope faced excommunication, armed feuds, and exile. Today, couples still run away to wed, bypassing parents, avoiding social media spectacle, and reinventing their commitments. Despite the centuries and cultures that separate us, both eras wrestle with the same fundamental tug. When love clashes with obligation, which path does the heart choose? In this chapter, we'll explore the stories of medieval elopements that shook kingdoms, of secret weddings in abbeys, clandestine journeys by moonlight, and families uprooted by scandal. We'll then turn to modern parallels, Vegas elopements, backroad ceremonies, and viral social media breakouts, revealing that the impulse to rebel against external pressures endures. From Thomas Mallory's tales of tragic nights to today's weekend escape brides, rebellious love remains an act of bravery, defiance, and hope. Along the way, we'll share both medieval and contemporary examples, draw lessons about risk and reward, and ultimately ask, 2 eras, 1 dilemma. How far will you go to follow your heart? Forbidden alliances and secret weddings in the Middle Ages. Imagine a moonlit night in 12th century Brittany. Lady Sybil of Cornwall, aged 17, paces within the stone walls of her family's manor. She's betrothed to Duke Alan, a wealthy match whose lands would secure her family's influence. Yet Sybil's heart belongs to Alan de Montfort, a younger squire she met at court. They've exchanged secret letters, each one promising devotion and dreams of life beyond arranged duty. Months of clandestine trysts lead to stolen moments in the chapel, where a sympathetic abbot prays for their union even though canon law forbids their marriage. On the eve of their escape, Sybil's father learns of a cryptic poem that arrived at her window, lines praising Alan's valor and vowing fidelity beyond the borders of this world. He forbids her from leaving, locks the manor gates, and posts knights to guard the courtyard. But Sybil and Alan slip away under the guise of midnight prayers. With only a traveling monk as witness, they're married at a remote hermitage, exchanging simple vows from memory. As dawn breaks, they mount their horses, galloping towards safe havens in English-held Brittany, knowing their families will brand them traitors. Such stories were far from rare. In 1189, Eleanor of Aquitaine's niece, Marie of Champagne, eloped with Baldwin IV of Hainaut. Though Marie had once been intended for a French prince, her heart led her across borders in secrecy. Their marriage, performed by a sympathetic bishop in a nameless village, became legendary. When King Philip II discovered the union, he threatened military intervention, only to relent when Baldwin's army threatened to raise the border regions. That elopement reshaped the political landscape. 2 powerful houses suddenly allied against a common monarch. Another famous case appears in the 14th century, when Lady Margaret de Clare ran away with her cousin, Leonard de Windham. Their family had intended Margaret to marry a French count for geopolitical gain. Leonard was a second son with little inheritance. Margaret's flight ignited a feud that lasted decades. Her father disinherited her, banished Leonard, and waged war on neighbors who offered them shelter. Only after years of skirmishes did Margaret's brothers concede that love's fire burned brighter than territorial gains. They brokered a peace treaty that recognized Margaret's marriage but stripped her of much of her dowry. The story became a cautionary tale. Love won out, but at great personal cost. Two eras, one dilemma. When the drive to follow the heart collides with feudal duty, families and kingdoms tip into conflict. Medieval elopements weren't just private dramas. They could spark wars, betrayals, and legal battles. Yet they also showcased the power of individual choice. For Sybil, Marie, and Margaret, trading security for passion meant sealing their fates on their own terms. The mechanics of a medieval elopement. Elopements in the Middle Ages required careful planning. Messenger pigeons carried coded letters. Trusted retainers scouted safe routes. Clergy willing to bend or break canon law were essential. Most couples fled under cover of darkness, traveling by river where knights patrolled fewer waters, or slipping across mountain passes where local shepherds guided them. They often carried only a token, an embroidered cloak, a shared chalice, or a parchment contract of secrecy, promising to honor each other's families in new ways. Consider the case of Sir Roland and Lady Brianna in 13th century Gascony, engaged since childhood to noble suitors hand-picked by their families. They met secretly during Mass, exchanged glances, and pledged themselves in whispered Latin. Roland's squire, Père, supplied them with false dispatches to mislead Roland's parents into believing he was at a distant tournament. They waited until the harvest festival, when crowds diverted attention, and slipped out on horseback amid dancing peasants. At dawn they reached a remote abbey near the Pyrenees, where Brother Guillaume, sympathetic to young love, married them before the priest's kinsmen realized what had happened. Their stories often ended in exile. Excommunication loomed if couples dined without priestly permission. Titles could be stripped, lands seized. Yet many found that forging their own way, navigating hostile territory, evading trackers, forging new alliances, proved a reward worth the risk. While a handful perished from exposure or banditry, most found refuge among itinerant knights or within the church's poorer monasteries, where the politics of high nobility held little sway. Modern elopements, weddings unplugged and viral scandals. Jump to 2025, and rebellious love still finds its way around conventions. Think of Jenna and Marcus, two marketing professionals in Seattle whose parents insisted on a big wedding at a country club. They dreamed instead of a small beach ceremony in Hawaii, just the two of them, a registrar, and a ukulele playing local. They scoured websites, booked the cheapest flight on cargo space seats. Yes, cargo holds sometimes include limited passenger spaces, and reserved a quiet cove with minimal cell reception. They wore rented linen suits, local lake garlands, and said their vows as the sun dipped below the Pacific horizon. Their families discovered the news via Instagram Live, 2 hours after they were legally married. Another example, Alexa and Devin, both software engineers in Austin, decided that a full-scale wedding would mean thousands of dollars in gifts, bridal dresses, and DJ fees. Instead, they organized an elopement tour on social media, booking a private chapel in New Orleans and live-streaming their ceremony to a curated guest list. Their immediate families received private codes to watch, friends tuned in via Discord. Thanks to good bandwidth and a savvy tech team, their vows were heard across 5 continents. While some relatives were miffed by the lack of physical celebration, most appreciated the intimacy and the fact that gifts could be sent electronically instead of bulky china sets. Scandals still flare when elopements defy cultural expectations. In one 2024 incident, a high-profile couple in Bollywood staged a secret wedding in Jaipur at dawn. Paparazzi snapped photos of them on camels, images that went global within hours. Their families, worried about cross-caste unions, publicly disowned them. Online comments flooded, "Shame! Brave! Arranged marriages forever." The couple responded with a viral TikTok duet, set to traditional Rajasthani music, narrating their love story in under a minute. They leveraged social media to transform scandal into solidarity, rallying fans behind the idea that personal choice can overcome social stigma. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. When love means defiance, the consequence can be exile or a viral hashtag. Medieval lovers risked exile from home and church. Modern couples risk public shaming, cancel culture, and the strain of dissolved relationships with parents. Yet in both eras, the act of elopement remains a powerful statement. My life, my terms. Lessons from medieval and modern rebellious love. First, timing matters. Medieval couples often chose festival days, market fairs, or religious pilgrimages, moments of heightened activity, so their flight blended into the crowds. Marquis de Baron, who eloped with a peasant woman in 14th century Burgundy, timed his escape during the annual grape harvest. Workers, merchants, and pilgrims clogged the roads, making pursuit difficult. Today's couples might pick public holidays, red-eye flights, or last-minute Airbnb availability to slip away without raising alarms. Second, alliances and new family ties matter. When Lord Harcourt eloped with a commoner named Agnes in 1291, he stunned his kin. But Agnes's uncle happened to be an influential cleric in a neighboring diocese. That cleric intervened, smoothing the path to legitimize their marriage and sparing Harcourt's lands from confiscation. In modern contexts, couples sometimes build new networks, LGBTQ+ partners in unaccepting families, for example, by cultivating supportive communities online or within local advocacy groups. These alliances provide emotional, legal, and financial backing. Lauren and Mia, a same-sex couple in Mississippi, found refuge through a regional queer support network. When their families threatened to cut them off, community fundraisers helped them secure a small home and legal counsel to ensure their marriage remained recognized. Third, communication and compromise are crucial. Medieval elopers often wrote letters explaining their actions. Sybil convinced her estranged brother by revealing how she would honor family lands, even if she refused her arranged match. In 2020, journalists discovered that many modern elopers send video letters to their loved ones, airing their feelings, regrets, and hopes. When 30-year-old tech lead Diego elope to Iceland with his childhood sweetheart, he recorded a 10-minute apology and explanation, posted to a private YouTube link. Those words softened his parents. While hurt, they recognized his commitment. Saxon and Mariah, who ran off to a courthouse in Miami after a heated debate over wedding costs, wrote an open letter to their circles. We love you, but we needed to do this on our own terms. Their honesty reduced resentment and opened pathways for reconciliation. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. A well-chosen letter can turn enmity into understanding. Medieval lovers risked curses if discovered. Modern couples risk digital flame wars. Both found that explaining motives, however late, often opens hearts. When rebellion backfires, tragic outcomes and hard lessons. Not every elopement ended happily. In 1170, Lady Guinevere of Warwick eloped with Sir Baldwin de Clare, defying her father's strict betrothal to a Norman baron. When King Henry II discovered the clandestine marriage, he ordered them hunted. Baldwin died resisting capture. Guinevere, branded a traitor, spent years in a nunnery as penance. Her family reclaimed her dowry. She lost her lands and her autonomy. That cautionary tale circulated throughout England as a warning. To rebel was to invite ruin, not romance. Modern parallels exist too. In 2019, a pair of college sweethearts in Utah, both devout members of a conservative religious community, secretly wed at a private service without parental knowledge. When their parents discovered the news, via a local blogger who spotted their registry, they filed for annulment and pressured community elders to ostracize the couple. The couple's jobs at the community's nonprofit were terminated, forcing them to relocate and start anew. They described their elopement as a move for love, not defiance, but the social backlash made them question if the cost was worth it. These stories reveal that rebellion without support can be devastating. Medieval lovers needed protectors among the nobility or high clergy. Modern couples often need legal counsel and supportive networks. Without adequate planning, securing safe passage, ensuring financial autonomy, and anticipating social fallout, elopement can backfire. A few medieval couples who eloped into hostile territories found themselves kidnapped, ransomed, or sold into servitude. Some modern couples, fleeing overbearing families, discovered that initial freedom gave way to unexpected hardships, such as housing insecurity or legal battles over assets. 2 eras, 1 lesson. One clear lesson emerges. When you break away from family or community expectations, build your own foundations first. Medieval lovers succeeded when they had powerful allies or clear assets to claim. Modern couples fare better when they have savings, supportive friends, and a plan for housing, legal name changes, or visa applications. If a medieval couple lacked a reliable sponsor, their elopement often ended in tragedy. Similarly, modern pairs who lack a safety net, financial, legal, or emotional, risk losing more than they gain. That said, the courage to choose love over obligation inspires generations. Medieval troubadours immortalized rebellious unions in song, preserving their defiance in cultural memory. Modern couples who elope often find their stories shared as feel-good viral moments, proof that following one's heart remains a valued ideal. A smooth bridge to nomadic leadership. Queen Tomris and women at war. We've seen how rebellious love, elopements, and scandals shook medieval and modern societies, illuminating the cost of defiance and the power of conviction. But beyond romantic rebellion, the Middle Ages also witnessed a different kind of courageous choice. Women leading armies, challenging empires, and defying tradition on a grand scale. In our next section, we'll journey eastward to the steppes of Central Asia, where Queen Tomris of the Massagetæ rebelled against Cyrus the Great's political overtures and led her people to a historic victory. Two eras, one dilemma. Standing up to overwhelming forces in the name of principle, whether in love or leadership. Let's cross the continent and meet the nomadic queen whose story still resonates with anyone daring to chart their own course. Two eras, one dilemma. Leading with courage when society tells you that your place is elsewhere. On the sun-scorched plains of Central Asia nearly 2,500 years ago, Queen Tomris of the Massagetæ defied every expectation of a submissive female princess. She took up arms against Cyrus the Great, not because she craved conquest, but because she refused to see her people's way of life extinguished. In 2025, women in many parts of the world still navigate similar challenges, stepping into roles long considered off-limits by tradition. Whether commanding armies on horseback or leading peacekeeping missions in urban centers, female leaders continue to balance personal conviction with deeply ingrained cultural norms. Understanding Tomris's story invites us to explore how women across time have risen to meet extraordinary challenges, often at great personal cost, to shape their communities and, ultimately, history itself. Tomris and the Massagetæ, a nomadic culture of equality. Two eras, one dilemma. Valuing military prowess over patriarchal expectations. To understand Tomris, we must first step into the world of the Massagetæ, a nomadic confederation roaming the vast Eurasian steppe east of the Caspian Sea. Imagine endless grasslands, where felt yurts move with the seasons and herds of horses, cattle, and sheep form the backbone of daily life. Men and women alike mastered horsemanship from early childhood. Bow and arrow were as common in a girl's hand as a boy's. Social status hinged not on elaborate titles but on deeds, bravery in battle, wisdom in council, and fairness in distributing resources. In this environment, Tomris's ascent to leadership was less an act of rebellion within her own society than it was a testament to it. She rose because she embodied the principles admired by her people, not despite them. Herodotus, the Greek historian, offers our principal account, possibly the only written narrative of Tomris's life. He describes how Cyrus the Great, fresh from conquering Lydia and Babylon, sought to expand his burgeoning Achaemenid empire into Massagetæ territory. Instead of launching a straightforward military campaign, Cyrus attempted a subtler approach, a political marriage. He sent envoys proposing that Tomris marry him, hoping to absorb her people through alliance rather than steel. For a sedentary ruler accustomed to alliances cemented by marriage, this tactic made sense. Tomris, however, saw through the proposal's true aim: submission, loss of autonomy, and the end of Massagetæ freedom. She replied with polite firmness, refusing to bend her people's destiny to Persian designs. That refusal provoked Cyrus to attack. He crossed the Araxes River, established fortified camps, and underestimated his enemy. The Massagetæ, under Tomris's leadership, struck back with characteristic agility and fury. Her son, Sperapises, led the initial counterattack, only to be ensnared by a Persian trap involving drunken soldiers and deception. When Sperapises fell into Persian hands and took his own life to avoid dishonor, Tomris's grief turned to resolve. As any mother would, her personal loss fused with political purpose, forging a leader determined to avenge her son's death and protect her people. She marshaled her warrior horde, men and women alike, and rode into battle against Cyrus's army. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Mourning personal tragedy while leading a people in warfare. In 530 BCE, on the plains near present-day Turkmenistan, horse archers swept through Persian infantry. Tomris herself is said to have taken the field, guiding her warriors with steadfast resolve. The result was catastrophic for Cyrus. The Persian king fell in battle. Tomris ordered his head severed and placed into a wineskin filled with blood, a stark symbol of retribution. Though Herodotus's account may blend fact and legend, its core highlights a fundamental truth. A woman of the Masashte could lead warriors into battle and triumph over the most formidable emperor of the age. The legacy of a rebel queen reverberations through time. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Being celebrated by outsiders more than by one's own people. Though Tomris's victory shook the ancient world, her own society did not inscribe her name on stone monuments or compose official chronicles in her honor. The Masashte valued deeds over memorials, and as nomads they left few permanent markers. It was Herodotus, an outsider, who preserved her name. He elevated her to near-mythic status, writing of her vengeance as though it were a Greek tragedy. In the centuries to come, her story passed into legend, embellished in medieval romances, painted by Renaissance masters as a bloodthirsty Amazon, and rediscovered by modern historians seeking to balance male-centric narratives of antiquity. By contrast, modern female leaders often face a parallel struggle. Admired by international audiences, who see in them icons of empowerment, they can be neglected or maligned within their own societies. Consider Aung San Suu Kyi, who rose to global prominence as Myanmar's pro-democracy symbol. International media celebrated her moral fortitude, while segments of her own population criticized her leadership decisions. Or think of Lema Boe, the Liberian activist whose grassroots movement helped end a brutal civil war. Worldwide, she won a Nobel Peace Prize. At home, she faced skepticism from those unaccustomed to women as war mediators. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Assuming the mantle of leadership can bring international praise but local resistance. Tomris's story reminds us that female authority can be both revered and resisted, celebrated and erased. Today's female heads of state, generals, or CEOs often find their images immortalized in print, yet their legacies can falter if they lack grassroots support, or when political tides turn. Preservation of memory, whether through record-keeping or cultural narratives, remains a fraught endeavor. Yet the fundamental lesson echoes across millennia. Women with conviction can alter the course of history, even if their own societies struggle to recognize their worth. Modern parallels, women leading in times of conflict. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Stepping into roles of power when tradition dictates a different path. In 2025, female military leaders, diplomats, and civic organizers continue to chart paths that diverge from conventional expectations. In the United States, Admiral Michelle Howard and General N.E. Dunwoody shattered glass ceilings, becoming the first woman to command a Navy ship into combat and the first female 4-star general in the Army, respectively. In Ukraine, women like Brigadier General Inna Derisova have risen through the ranks to lead troops on the front lines of modern conflicts. Across Africa, Lieutenant General Margaret Dongo of Zimbabwe and Major General Christine Nyangoma of Rwanda command respect for their strategic acumen. These women navigate militaries historically dominated by men, often facing skepticism from peers who question whether they can handle battlefield realities. Similarly, in war-torn Yemen, Tawakkol Karman's nonviolent leadership in the Arab Spring earned her a Nobel Peace Prize, even as she defied patriarchal norms within her own nation. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Balancing personal conviction and familial expectations. Many of these leaders described facing pressure to conform, marry young, prioritize domestic roles, or avoid men's business. Yet, like Tomris, they embraced leadership during crises, believing they could best serve their people. Their experiences echo the ancient queens, proving that when cultural norms restrict leadership to men, women with determination can, and must, step forward. Lessons from Tamris and today's female leaders. Reflecting on Tamris's story alongside modern women in warfare and governance yields a powerful lesson. Leadership demands personal sacrifice, but can also be a catalyst for broader social change. Tamris sacrificed private grief to unify her people in defense. Modern military leaders often face separation from family and constant public scrutiny. In both eras, the choice to lead required strength against societal norms. Yet those who answered the call also reshaped perceptions, proving that valor and wisdom know no gender. Another lesson emerges. Authenticity and accountability foster respect. Tamris did not feign male authority. She led as a nomadic woman, embracing the Masajidi's values of courage and justice. Modern female admirals and generals often emphasize collaborative leadership, forging trust through competency rather than conformity to macho stereotypes. Their authenticity challenges institutions to evolve, just as Tamris's leadership encouraged the Masajide to recognize female capacity for power. The intersection of culture, gender, and power. Two eras, one dilemma. Honoring tradition while pushing its boundaries. In the Masajide culture, a woman like Tamris could lead because strength and leadership were not exclusively defined by gender, they were lived through deeds. Children of either sex learned archery and horsemanship. The same ethos existed among the Sarmatians and later among the Mongols. Female warriors served alongside men, and royal blood did not guarantee authority unless the person proved worthy. In contrast, many medieval societies, especially sedentary ones, imposed stricter gender roles. A noblewoman might role in proxy, overseeing estates while her husband was at war, but rarely led armies herself. Yet among nomads, when a man fell in battle or through intrigue, women stepped into leadership, not as exceptions, but as continuations of communal resilience. These cultures understood that survival on volatile frontiers required all hands on deck. Modern militaries differ. Women often must overcome institutional barriers, combat restrictions, biased evaluations, and limited advancement opportunities. Two eras, one dilemma. Forging paths when existing structures resist change. In 2023, the United States lifted its last combat exclusion policy, formally allowing women to serve in any role. In practice, however, deep-seated stereotypes and logistical hurdles still hamper full integration. Yet, as more female commanders demonstrate competence, those barriers erode, mirroring how nomadic cultures evolved to value ability over birthright. Two eras, one lesson. Whether on the open steppe or in contemporary command centers, leadership demands more than title. It requires unwavering commitment to one's people and vision. Tamris's resolve to defend the Masajide, fueled by personal loss and communal duty, illustrates how crisis can birth leaders from unexpected quarters. Today's female leaders confront different crises, terrorism, political strife, or social inequality, but their paths often mirror Tamris's. Confronting entrenched norms, earning trust through action, and navigating dangers both physical and ideological. A smooth bridge to nomadic societies, culture, trade, and gender roles. We've witnessed how Queen Tamris harnessed nomadic values to lead her people to victory, and how modern female leaders draw from similar wellsprings of courage and authenticity. In our next section, we'll widen our lens to examine nomadic societies more broadly, exploring Scythians, Bedouins, and Mongols, their culture of mobility, trade networks, and evolving gender roles. Two eras, one dilemma. Thriving amid constant change, whether racing across grasslands or navigating globalized connections. Let's journey onward to uncover how nomads shaped world history, long before empires could anchor their power in stone. Two eras, one dilemma. Thriving on mobility while balancing community needs. Imagine vast grasslands stretching to the horizon, where yurts drift with the seasons and herds of horses shape daily life. Nomadic societies, from the Scythians of the Eurasian steppe to the Bedouins of the Arabian desert to the Mongols of the high plains, constructed cultures rooted in movement, trade, and a surprising degree of gender flexibility. Fast forward to 2025, and we see parallels in remote work cultures, digital nomads, and conversations about gender roles in modern workplaces. In both eras, people renegotiate identity and relationships when freedom of movement is central to survival. In this chapter, we'll wander through nomadic worlds, exploring how mobility dictated social structure, how trade networks built bridges between distant civilizations, and how gender roles unfolded differently than in sedentary societies. We'll look at Scythian grave finds revealing female warriors, Bedouin codes of hospitality upheld by women, and Mongol princesses as shrewd power brokers. Alongside these ancient examples, we'll glimpse modern echoes, digital nomads forging global careers and contemporary discussions about women in non-traditional roles. By the end, we'll see how freedom on the move creates both opportunities and tensions. Two eras, one dilemma, living untethered yet anchored by community values. Culture in motion, the foundations of nomadic life. Across nomadic societies, mobility wasn't just a lifestyle choice, it was a necessity dictated by climate, livestock needs, and trade opportunities. Scythians, around the 8th to 3rd centuries BCE, roamed the Pontic, Caspian steppe with horse and bow as their primary tools. Their tents were simple felt structures, portable homes that could be dismantled and reassembled within hours. Similarly, Bedouins traversed the Arabian deserts, their black goat hair tents alternating in shaded oases, always moving to find water and grazing for camels. Mongols, under Genghis Khan, transformed the Mongolian steppes in the 13th century, organizing clans into mobile encampments called cradles that shifted with winter snows and summer pastures. In all these cultures, land wasn't owned permanently. It was shared according to clan or tribal agreements. Pasture rights rotated with seasons, safeguarded by oral customs rather than written deeds. When the Scythians migrated westward to raid or trade with Greek colonies along the Black Sea, they relied on clan councils to negotiate grazing corridors. Later, when climate pressures intensified in the early medieval period, Turkic tribes moved south into Central Asia, reshaping political boundaries and forging alliances with local sedentary kingdoms. Unlike the sedentary world of walled cities and fixed estates, nomads measured wealth in livestock, horses, cattle, sheep, camels, not in acres tilled. The horse held particular prestige. From the moment Scythian children learned to ride, their lives revolved around horsemanship. A Scythian warrior could gallop 60 miles a day, arrow nocked, striking fear into agrarian kingdoms that struggled to match that mobility. Among the Bedouins, camels earned the moniker ships of the desert. Their ability to traverse sand and store water in humps crucial for survival. When Europeans studied these cultures, they marveled at how nomads depended on herd size rather than grain stores, a fundamental shift in economic thinking that influenced trade networks for millennia. Two eras, one dilemma, valuing movement while maintaining social cohesion. Nomads had to trust each other deeply. Clans moved as units, and survival often meant sharing resources with distant clans. Historical accounts tell of Scythian and Sarmatian tribes uniting against invading Persians when pastureland dwindled, setting aside rivalries for the greater good. Modern digital nomads face a parallel. Working remotely from co-living spaces or co-working hubs, they juggle independence with community living. Whether on horseback or online, freedom requires a safety net of trust. Trade as the thread, nomads connecting worlds. Nomadic societies played pivotal roles in connecting distant civilizations. Far from being isolated wanderers, they formed the cross-continental arteries that carried goods, ideas, and even religions. The Silk Road, stretching from Chang'an, modern Xi'an, to Antioch, existed only because nomadic tribes provided security and logistical support. The Scythian intermediaries facilitated trade in furs and grain with Greek city-states along the Black Sea. When the Han dynasty sought horses superior for cavalry, they negotiated with the Xiongnu nomadic tribes in the Mongolian steppes to secure stock for their armies. In the Arabian Peninsula, Bedouin tribes guarded incense and spice trade caravans, guiding merchants from southern Arabia to Levantine ports. Their intimate knowledge of desert trails prevented caravans from losing precious cargo or succumbing to sandstorms. Over centuries, Bedouin hosts became indispensable to merchants plying the frankincense routes and silk routes below the Red Sea. Cultural exchanges flourished. Persian textiles reached Mecca, African ivory found its way to Baghdad. Buddhist monks traveled disguised as merchants to spread their teachings westward. The Mongol Empire elevated nomadic trade networks to unprecedented heights. Genghis Khan's conquests opened vast territories, and his successors established a Pax Mongolica, ensuring relative safety along trade routes. Silk, paper, gunpowder, and porcelain flowed westward. Gold, olive oil, and new crops moved east. Mongol postal stations, Yam, allowed messages and merchants to travel thousands of miles in weeks, not months. This connectivity transformed medieval Eurasia, Italy's Renaissance financed partly by Asian luxuries. Europe's population shifting due to new agricultural products. Religious ideas grafted onto local belief systems. Two eras, one dilemma. Leveraging mobility to foster exchange yet guarding against cultural erosion. While trade brought wealth and innovation, it also spread diseases. The Black Death of the 14th century, which devastated Europe, likely traveled along these same routes. Nomadic carriers, unwitting or indifferent, could transmit plague from Central Asia to Crimea, from Crimea to Mediterranean ports, and onward. Today, globalized trade and travel bring similar challenges. As pandemics show how interconnected we remain, the lesson remains that openness fosters prosperity but demands vigilance. Gender roles, fluidity on the move. One of the most striking aspects of nomadic societies was their relatively fluid gender roles, particularly compared to many sedentary cultures. Archaeological excavations of Scythian Kurgan burials have uncovered female skeletons buried with weapons, bows, axes, and horse tack. DNA analysis confirmed that some of those skeletons belonged to women who died in combat, their bones bearing battle wounds. Historians surmise that among the Scythians, women learned archery alongside men, and when clans rallied to defend pastures or raid neighboring kingdoms, women took part as equals. Alesia, a famed Scythian biker, so named affectionately by modern scholars, became a symbol of female strength and autonomy. Likewise, among the Cuman and Khazar tribes northeast of the Black Sea, female warriors held command roles within tribal armies. Chronicles from Kievan Rus in the 11th century mention Cuman women leading cavalry charges against the emerging Rus principalities. As the Mongols swept across those same territories in the 13th century, they encountered communities where women fought shoulder to shoulder with men, a practice that wouldn't be matched in most of Europe for centuries. Bedouin gender roles also held remarkable flexibility. While men typically herd camels and negotiate tribal alliances, Bedouin women managed tents, prepared food, and engaged in trade. A Bedouin woman might barter goat cheese and woven blankets at market, negotiating directly with merchants whom she often outbid in shrewdness. Some tribes allowed women to initiate divorce, known as khula in Islamic law, giving them a measure of autonomy rare in neighboring sedentary societies. In ceremonies, a bride's dowry included her personal earnings from weaving and dairy production. Her marriage contract could stipulate that she retained control of those assets, giving her leverage within the union. In the Mongol world, women like Torjin Khatan and Oghul Kamish rose to regency, wielding immense influence over state affairs. Torjin managed the empire's finances, appointed regional governors, and even directed military campaigns while her son Monk Khan consolidated power. Her leadership style, pragmatic, ruthless when necessary, and adept at maintaining alliances among fractious tribes, revealed that within Mongol culture, women could hold statecraft roles forbidden to their counterparts in Tang or Song China. Two eras, one dilemma. Navigating freedom when cultural norms are in flux. While nomadic women enjoyed broader latitude in warfare and politics, they still confronted expectations, honor, loyalty to clan, and totemic obligations tied to ancestral spirits. Modern parallels echo in discussions of workplace equity. Women ascending corporate ladders may find greater opportunity in startups and tech sectors, digital stets, but still face bias and cultural pressures. The lesson is that mobility, whether on horseback or across career paths, can expand gender roles, yet societal expectations never fully dissolve. Rituals, stories, and oral traditions. In societies without written archives, oral tradition served as legal code, history book, and entertainment. Nomadic elders memorized genealogies stretching back dozens of generations, recalling which clan descended from which legendary ancestor. When disputes arose over grazing rights, livestock theft, or marriage alliances, tribal councils convened, and elders recited precedents handed down through bards. These living libraries ensured continuity, transforming songs and epics into binding guidelines. Among the Kyrgyz in Central Asia, epic poems like the Manas played dual roles: a story of heroic deeds and a source of moral codes. Reciters performed for days at a time, weaving in tribal values, lessons in courage, and examples of treachery to avoid. Similarly, Bedouin poetry, Nabend, Zajal, and Kada, preserved history and conveyed ethical norms. A poet's reputation hinged on accuracy and creativity, ensuring that oral tradition remained both entertaining and reliable. Even Mongols, who later adopted written Uyghur script, continued robust oral storytelling. The Secret History of the Mongols, our chief primary source for Genghis Khan's rise, originated as oral recitations before being transcribed. That text not only chronicles military conquests but also illustrates tribal laws, marriage customs, and spiritual rituals, revealing a society where oral and literate cultures coexisted. Two eras, one dilemma. Honoring the past while shaping the future. In our digital age, podcasts, digital archives, and social media memes carry forward oral traditions. A mobile user can post a 60-second TikTok retelling of an indigenous legend, extending that culture's oral heritage into new electronic venues. Yet the risk remains that algorithms will privilege sensational over nuanced stories, echoing the way some medieval bards might emphasize dramatic battles over subtler community values. Whether in the steppe or on a phone screen, transmission requires balance, authenticity alongside adaptation. Two eras, one lesson. Nomadic cultures teach us that mobility can redefine social structures, enabling trade and expanding horizons, but that freedom also demands adaptability and strong communal bonds. Scythian horse archers thrived because they mastered their environment, yet they depended on clan councils to avoid internecine warfare. Bedouin caravanners linked continents by guiding trade through perilous deserts, yet relied on tribal codes, hearth, to resolve disputes. Mongol Khans forged the largest contiguous empire ever seen, harnessing nomadic agility, but they also instituted laws, yasa, to govern a multi-ethnic realm. In 2025, digital nomads navigate similar tensions. Freelance coders hop between co-working spaces worldwide, yet rely on online communities and co-living networks for support. When remote teams lack face-to-face interaction, they forge trust through transparent communication tools and shared rituals. Daily video stand-ups that echo nomadic gatherings under the open sky. The lesson is clear. Mobility can unlock opportunity, but without communal anchors, whether a clan council or a Slack channel, freedom can devolve into isolation. A smooth bridge to the transcontinental railroad. We've journeyed through nomadic societies, examining mobility, trade, and gender roles, and seen how those patterns ripple into today's world of remote work and fluid identity. Now, our path turns toward another great story of movement: the Transcontinental Railroad in 19th century America. There, hundreds of miles of steel tracks transformed a continent, enabling movement on an unprecedented scale but also sparking conflict, displacement, and vast economic shifts. Two eras, one dilemma. Linking distant lands for progress while guarding against social and environmental costs. Let's gather at Promontory Summit and witness how iron rails remapped a nation, just as nomads once shaped the world through hooves and caravans. Two eras, one dilemma. Believing in a grand vision that ties distant places together while wrestling with the politics and money needed to bring that vision to life. In 19th century America, the idea of a transcontinental railroad captured imaginations. Steam engines roaring from coast to coast, shrinking months-long journeys to a matter of days. But making that dream real meant drafting legislation, negotiating land grants, and mobilizing unprecedented sums of capital. Fast forward to 2025, and similar dilemmas arise when governments propose massive infrastructure projects. Whether high-speed rail lines, broadband access, or renewable energy grids, the promise of unity and progress runs headlong into the complexities of financing, politics, and competing interests. In both eras, visionaries and pragmatists debate the cost of connecting worlds. The vision beyond tracks and timber. In the early 1850s, California's gold rush had transformed remote towns like Sacramento into booming hubs. Yet reaching the East Coast remained a perilous months-long ordeal. By sea around Cape Horn, by overland wagon train subject to disease and attack, or by a mixed route crossing the Isthmus of Panama. Settlers, miners, and politicians alike dreamed of a direct link. Steel rails stretching from Sacramento's foothills to Omaha's Platte River Valley. Samuel Bowles, editor of the Springfield Republican, wrote in 1853, "Imagine a train of iron carriages, leaving New York today, pulling into San Francisco in a week's time. Commerce, migration, and ideas unleashed in an instant." That vision wasn't mere fantasy. It appealed to national unity, economic growth, and military mobility. President Abraham Lincoln, inaugurated in March 1861, saw the railroad as a strategic necessity. He recognized that binding California and Oregon to the Union by rail would cut off any hope for the Confederacy to pull the far west into its orbit. Even as Civil War drums sounded in 1861, Lincoln quietly pressed Congress to authorize a Pacific Railway. Two eras, one dilemma. Stitching distant communities together before the country tore apart, versus focusing resources on an existential conflict. Lincoln believed that achieving both goals was possible. The Pacific Railway Act of 1862 bore his signature, authorizing two companies to build from opposite ends: Union Pacific from Omaha heading west, Central Pacific from Sacramento heading east, toward a meeting point in the Utah Territory. That law represented the fulcrum where vision met legislative action. It embodied not just the dream of coast-to-coast steam but also a wartime gamble, using government incentives to ensure that northern states and territories remained firmly linked to Washington. At a time when statehood hung in the balance, the railroad's promise of swift troop and supply movement became a powerful argument for the Union's cause. Far from a luxury, Lincoln framed the railroad as a lifeline, vital to preserve national cohesion. Even as bullets flew and brother fought brother, lawmakers recognized that a rail link could shape America's future beyond the battlefield. Forging the legislation, the Pacific Railway Acts. Writing a bill is easy. Persuading Congress to pass it is another matter. The Pacific Railway Act of July 1, 1862, laid out key provisions. Two private companies would build the line. Each mile of completed track would earn them 16 square miles of land, plus federal loans, $16,000 per mile on flat land, $32,000 per mile through foothills, and $48,000 per mile through mountains. In exchange, the companies agreed to maintain the tracks and deliver mail and troops. Those terms sparked lively debates. Would government subsidies amount to favoritism toward monopolistic interests? Could the nation afford the massive land giveaways when Civil War costs loomed? Representative Justin S. Morrill of Vermont, who sponsored the bill in the House, argued that land grants and loans were the only way private capitalists would risk such a forbidding project. Opponents, often from southern states that had already seceded, decried the plan as a pork barrel favoring northern rail barons. Yet when Georgia, Mississippi, and other slave states left Congress in early 1861, the balance shifted decisively. With pre-Union legislators holding sway, the Pacific Railway Acts moved forward. Two eras, one dilemma, using federal largesse to spur development while risking charges of cronyism, versus leaving such a monumental task to private capital, likely ensuring it never got off the ground. Once passed, the act set a high bar. The rail companies had to finish 338 miles of track within a set time frame to retain land grants. Each company formed its own powerful board, Union Pacific led by Thomas Durant and Central Pacific by Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker. Known collectively as the Big Four, they galvanized investors, raised additional capital through stock offerings, and began surveying routes. Still, the legislative blueprint, land grant maps, bond schedules, and mileage milestones provided a framework but left countless details to be worked out: which mountain passes to cross, where to locate supply depots, and how to negotiate rights of way with Native American tribes. Financing the Iron Path, land grants, and bonds. Cash on hand could rarely cover the staggering costs of rails, locomotives, tunnels, and rolling stock. The Pacific Railway Act's land grants functioned as a form of collateral. For each mile laid, the railroad companies received alternating sections of public land extending 10 miles on either side of the track. Those 10,240 acres per mile could be sold to settlers, timber companies, or speculators. Ideal parcels, near rivers or grazing streams, sold quickly, sometimes at $2.50 per acre or more, especially once the rails neared completion and regional barons knew that market access was imminent. Union Pacific began its work in Omaha, Nebraska, financed partly by $16,000 per mile government bonds, supplemented by state-backed bonds for Missouri. Meanwhile, Central Pacific tapped into California's wealth, issuing its own corporate stock. The Big Four plowed their personal fortunes into Central Pacific, snapping up nearby land claims and extending small-line feeder railroads to supply timber and ore. They also raised money by selling stock to East Coast investors, brokered through Boston and New York bankers hungry for a slice of the action. Two eras, one dilemma. Relying on public subsidies and private capital, balancing risk and reward, versus leaving mission-critical infrastructure entirely to private investors, potentially slowing national growth. However, financing proved perilous. The railroad's early years saw cost overruns as Central Pacific's crews labored to carve tunnels through the Sierra Nevada. Estimates for each mile through easy terrain ballooned when crews encountered unanticipated rock formations, requiring more explosives and manpower. Meanwhile, Union Pacific grappled with a lack of nearby resources on the plains. They transported rails and ties hundreds of miles east from St. Louis, inflating costs. Two eras, one dilemma. Projecting costs accurately in an era of uncertainty versus risking bankruptcy by underestimating the capital required. The shadow of corruption, credit mobilier, and public trust. Even as rails extended across prairie grasses, whispers of corruption followed. In 1864, insiders from Union Pacific formed Credit Mobilier of America, a separate construction company. They then contracted Credit Mobilier to lay Union Pacific track at vastly inflated prices, sometimes 5 times the true cost, pocketing the difference. To keep Congress from investigating, they handed out discounted shares of Credit Mobilier stock to key legislators, hoping to secure friendly votes and hush money. When a whistleblower exposed the scheme in 1872, a national scandal erupted, tarnishing reputations on both coasts. Two eras, one dilemma. Using every available tool to raise capital versus preserving public trust by adhering to transparent accounting. The fallout shook public confidence in large infrastructure projects. Newspapers branded the affair railroad ring and stock watering, and members of Congress scrambled to distance themselves. Even President Ulysses S. Grant's administration found its approval ratings dragged down by revelations of graft. Yet the railroad itself remained a monument to ambition, absorbing the scandal without derailing completion. In the end, Congress passed bills tightening regulations on corporate stock issuance, downgrading public subsidies where possible, and mandating more rigorous oversight of federal contracts. Modern parallels are easy to spot. When federal funds, whether for highways, bridges, or social programs, flow into private hands, the specter of overspending and insider deals arises. In 2021, when the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act allocated billions for broadband expansion, some critics warned of pork barrel projects that would favor certain municipalities or contractors over genuinely underserved regions. Two eras, one dilemma. Balancing the need for rapid progress with the imperative of accountability. Lessons from Credit Mobilier remind us that grand projects can falter if public trust erodes, and that transparency and checks and balances are vital, whether the currency is gold coins in 1865 or digital payments in 2025. The role of surveyors, engineers, and pioneer laborers. With charters, land grants, and bond proceeds in place, both Union Pacific and Central Pacific turned to the formidable task of surveying routes and mobilizing labor. Surveyors, often Civil War veterans familiar with reconnaissance, mapped potential passes. Central Pacific's first engineer, Theodore Judah, took on the Sierra Nevada challenge, riding its peaks on horseback to find a passage. His detailed reports to Sacramento captivated investors. A route by Donner Pass is steep, yes, but feasible. Level grades abound beyond, promising swift progress to Salt Lake Valley. His charisma and expertise convinced merchants and bankers to pledge additional funds. Without him, the Sierra Nevada might have deterred all but the most daring financiers. Union Pacific's engineers faced different tests. On the Great Plains, they contended less with mountains and more with the endless expanse itself. They laid track at remarkable speeds, sometimes 3 miles a day, only to realize that resource scarcity in the prairies drove costs sky high. Without local timber for railroad ties or water for steam engines, they shipped supplies from as far as Iowa. Furthermore, skirmishes with Native American tribes disrupted progress, requiring militia escorts. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Overcoming environmental obstacles, be they mountain passes or digital bandwidth limitations, while maintaining momentum. Labor recruitment proved equally complex. Central Pacific recruited Chinese immigrants, many arriving after the Taiping Rebellion, offering them wages slightly above what they could earn in farm labor but still less than white workers received. By 1867, Chinese laborers comprised over 80% of the Central Pacific workforce. Their tireless efforts, boring tunnels through granite with hand drills, building trestles across canyons, embodied the human determination behind the steel vision. Union Pacific, meanwhile, hired Irish immigrants, Civil War veterans, freedmen, and local frontier men, all lured by promises of steady pay and a share in the Union's grand dream. Some labored under military protection. Others faced daily threats of attacks or harsh weather. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Mobilizing human capital in remote locations versus relying solely on technology to solve logistical hurdles. Modern megaprojects often speak of gig economies and subcontractor networks, relying on temp workers and remote consultants. But as the Transcontinental Railroad showed, success ultimately depended on boots on the ground, men and women who endured harsh conditions to drive spikes, set rails, and face dangers head-on. Their sweat-stained jackets and calloused hands remind us that grand visions require human grit as much as capital. Financing lessons for the 21st century. Looking back on the financing of the Transcontinental Railroad, we uncover a few enduring lessons. Public-private partnerships demand transparency. Land grants and government bonds fueled the railroad's construction, but they also opened the door to graft. Modern infrastructure projects, from high-speed rail proposals to urban transit expansions, must prioritize clear accounting, independent audits, and accountability to citizens. When federal subsidies flow, the public deserves to know exactly where that money goes. Vision requires bridging political divides. Lincoln's ability to pass the Pacific Railway Act during the Civil War is extraordinary. He won support by framing the railroad as essential to Union survival. Today's leaders can learn that aligning major infrastructure with broader national goals, climate resilience, economic equity, digital inclusion, can build coalitions that break partisan stalemates. Human capital remains irreplaceable. The Chinese laborers on the Central Pacific and the Irish and freedmen on the Union Pacific remind us that infrastructure relies on frontline workers. Modern parallels include construction workers, engineers, and technicians who build solar farms, fiber optic networks, or wind turbines. Investing in training, fair compensation, and worker safety isn't merely ethical. It's essential for project success. Geographic equity cannot be overlooked. The land grants prioritized routes through mountainous passes and key river valleys, rewarding companies for miles of track laid in remote areas. Yet some disadvantaged communities near those routes received little benefit. In the 21st century, equitable access to broadband or public transit requires deliberate planning to ensure rural and low-income areas aren't left behind. A smooth bridge to labor, conflict, and indigenous resistance. We've traced how lofty aspirations, the dream of a railroad uniting oceans, became law, motivated vast sums of capital, and confronted massive logistical challenges. Yet those rails did not lay themselves. Laborers risked life and limb. Conflicts erupted over resources and territory, and indigenous peoples, whose lands the tracks sliced through, resisted with reason and force. In our next section, we'll dig into those human dynamics. The stories of Chinese and Irish laborers carving tunnels in blinding snow, the battles over Native American homelands, and the broader social upheavals that accompanied the Iron Path. Two eras, one dilemma, forging progress while navigating human costs, whether in remote cants of 1867 or modern debates over community displacement by highways. The tracks lead onward. Let's follow them into the heart of conflict and labor. Two eras, one dilemma, building progress through human toil and facing the resistance of those whose lives it upended. In mid-19th century America, the Transcontinental Railroad was hailed as a marvel of engineering and national unity. Yet its construction depended on thousands of laborers, many of whom endured brutal conditions, and it sliced through ancestral lands of Native American tribes, sparking fierce resistance. Fast forward to 2025, when modern infrastructure projects similarly rely on migrant workers and intersect contested territories. In both eras, the drive to connect distant places clashes with human cost and cultural upheaval. As we explore labor, conflict, and indigenous resistance during the railroad's construction, we'll see how dreams of unity can also sow discord, and how understanding that tension can guide us today. The Chinese laborers, backbone of the Central Pacific. The Central Pacific Railroad Company faced its steepest challenge in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where granite peaks towered over the fledgling track. Surveyors estimated that for each mile laid, they'd need tunnels through solid rock, precarious timber trestles over deep canyons, and roadbeds carved into snowfields 4 stories deep. Local labor pools dwindled quickly. White laborers, many recent Civil War veterans, balked at the grueling conditions and risked sudden death from avalanches or black powder explosions. Two eras, one dilemma. Recruiting reliable workers for a dangerous frontier project versus relying on local labor that deserts at the first sign of peril. In 1865, Central Pacific turned to Chinese immigrants, more than 10,000 who had recently fled the Taiping Rebellion in Guangdong Province. Lured by promises of wages slightly above what Chinese laborers typically earned in agriculture, they signed contracts knowing they'd face racial prejudice, harsh pay inequity, and deadly working conditions. Their tasks included drilling into granite by hand, swinging picks to loosen boulders, and hoisting explosives into narrow tunnel shafts. 1 mile through granite at tunnel number 6 took nearly 2 years. In winter, snow drift depths reached 40 feet. Workers tunneled through vertical shafts like human escalators, chipping away at rock inch by inch. These Chinese laborers, far from home and family, lived in makeshift camps. Tents clustered on ledges carved from cliffs, often buried under snow for weeks. To keep spirits high, they cooked communal meals: rice, salted pork, and dried vegetables, passing bowls by hand when temperatures dipped below zero. During breaks, they sang folk songs from their province, creating a sense of community despite isolation. Two eras, one dilemma. Sustaining morale in extreme conditions versus expecting local hires to endure hardship without cultural solidarity. Their pay, set at $30 per month, was lower than white workers' $35 to $40, and often subjected to arbitrary deductions for food, lodging, and clothing. Yet Chinese crews proved remarkably resilient. Their skills with explosives, gathered from prior work in Southeast Asia, and their willingness to work through bitter winters earned grudging respect from supervisors. In April 1869, Central Pacific set a world record, laying 10 miles of track in a single day near Promontory Summit. Chinese laborers formed synchronized Gandhi dancers, hoisting rails, spiking ties, and aligning track with mechanical precision. Their feat would stand unmatched for decades. Despite this, when the Golden Spike ceremony took place on May 10, 1869, not a single Chinese worker stood among the dignitaries. Portrait engravings show only the Big Four executives and white laborers, relegating the essential Chinese contribution to silence. That omission stung even as it reflected prevailing racial prejudice. Two eras, one dilemma. Celebrating national achievement while erasing key contributors, versus honoring everyone's labor equally, regardless of origin. The Irish, freedmen, and frontier men, Union Pacific's western push. On the eastern prairies, Union Pacific faced different challenges. Vast stretches of open plains, unpredictable weather, and conflicts with indigenous peoples. Recruiting a stable workforce required luring veterans of the Civil War, Irish immigrants who had recently fled famine, and freedmen seeking new opportunities in a post-slavery economy. For them, laying track across Nebraska and Wyoming offered a chance to earn $40 per month, a comparatively decent wage at a time when many former soldiers struggled to find work. Union Pacific crews had to lay up to 3 miles of track per day when conditions allowed. They used steam-powered pile drivers and mule teams to clear sod, cut through shallow streams, and set rails. When they camped at Hell on Wheels towns, ramshackle tent cities springing up overnight along the track, their days were long but community life brief. Workers formed ethnic enclaves. Irish clustered around makeshift Catholic worship tents, while freedmen formed prayer groups and Sunday barbecues. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Forging solidarity in transient camps versus expecting individuals to endure isolation without support networks. As Union Pacific moved west, they encountered the open range, bison herds numbering in the tens of millions. Railroad crews, bored with track work during winter, sometimes staged buffalo hunts, an echo of leisure and necessity. Yet their ammunition-hungry rifles and expanding track pushed buffalo toward near extinction within 2 decades. By 1885, fewer than 1,000 bison remained. The decline of buffalo also shattered the livelihoods of Plains tribes, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, whose culture and sustenance depended on the herds. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Exploiting natural resources to power progress versus preserving indigenous economies tied to those resources. Conflict and resistance. Native American opposition. As rails advanced, indigenous tribes recognized that tracks carved their lands, disrupted seasonal migrations, and invited waves of settlers. Lakota Sioux under Red Cloud fought a fierce campaign dubbed Red Cloud's War, 1866 to 1868, successfully resisting Fort Phil Cunny's operations protecting surveying crews. Their ambush of Captain William J. Fetterman's detachment near Lodge Trail Ridge ended in a massacre that forced U.S. military withdrawal from critical posts. General William Tecumseh Sherman later observed that they hungered for a fight to preserve their freedom, and Red Cloud's treaty at Fort Laramie, 1868, temporarily halted railroad construction. Nevertheless, the U.S. government, buoyed by the Pacific Railway Acts, resumed building once it established military outposts along the route. Troops escorted work parties, forts sprang up near Sioux villages, and diplomatic overtures often masked pressure to cede land. The Ute, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Shoshone all resisted in various ways, raiding supply trains, burning bridges, and staging ambushes on railroad graders. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Resisting encroachment to defend sovereignty versus suffering defeat when faced with overwhelming military and economic force. In one stark episode, Cheyenne warriors attacked a supply convoy near Platte River in 1867, slaughtering livestock and capturing wagons. The railroad company, lacking adequate security, granted the U.S. Army permission to punish the tribe. The ensuing retaliation included the infamous Sand Creek Massacre of 1864. Though predating completion of the railroad, it underscored the broader pattern: indigenous people paying the price for perceived threats to westward expansion. A decade later, the Winnemucca and Bannock tribes in Oregon staged raids on tracks, forcing temporary rerouting. Each skirmish echoed a deeper struggle. Railroads symbolized not only industrial progress but cultural annihilation. Labor versus environment, ecological disruption. While labor disputes and armed conflict dominated headlines, the railroad's environmental toll unfolded quietly yet irreversibly. Every mile of track required tens of thousands of wooden ties, drawn from forests that once blanketed mountain foothills. In the Sierra Nevada, Central Pacific felled millions of trees, stripping watersheds of shade and altering snowmelt patterns. Downstream, miners and settlers used that timber to stoke smelting furnaces, compounding deforestation. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Harvesting natural resources for national growth versus preserving ecosystems that indigenous communities and wildlife depended on. On the plains, the railroad's steel lines bisected buffalo migration routes. Bison, encountering iron rails, stampeded and fractured herds. Hunting from moving trains compounded the slaughter, Passengers shot buffalo from observation cars as sporting trophies or to clear tracks. These practices accelerated the near extinction of a keystone species, transforming Great Plains ecology. By the late 1870s, the great herds were decimated. Grasslands, once shaped by buffalo grazing, shifted toward invasive plants and overgrazing by cattle. Modern parallels are visible in pipelines and highways slicing through tribal lands or critical habitats. When the Dakota Access Pipeline proposed crossing Sioux sacred waters, protests in 2016 and 2017 highlighted how infrastructure can threaten indigenous lifeways. Two eras, one dilemma: pursuing national or economic integration versus respecting environmental and cultural landscapes. The lessons of the 19th century railroad, its disregard for ecological balance, resonate as cautionary tales today. The human cost: injuries, fatalities, and health hazards. Few records survive documenting every life lost during railroad construction, but historians estimate thousands died of accidents, disease, or exposure. Blasting tunnels with nitroglycerin and black powder invited cave-ins and acid burns. Rail cars crushed fingers and limbs. Scurvy and dysentery spread through crowded Kents. Chinese laborers, living in denser quarters, faced cholera outbreaks. Poor sanitation rendered outbreaks near inevitable. Union Pacific's Irish workers endured brutal winter storms. Freezing temperatures, frostbite, and pneumonia claimed many lives. Two eras, one dilemma: expecting laborers to brave lethal conditions versus designing safer work environments that slow progress but reduce fatalities. When a massive snowslide crushed a Central Pacific camp at Emigrant Gap in March 1867, dozens died. Survivors crawled from snowdrifts to find their friends buried beneath frozen rubble. Similarly, an Irish crew near Cheyenne, Wyoming, caught in an early blizzard, resorted to huddling in shanties without firewood. Reports from spring 1868 detail bodies frozen solid in sleeping bags. Beyond weather, workplace violence flared in hell-on-wheels towns. Saloons, brothels, and gambling dens sprang up alongside construction camps. Alcohol abuse and fights left additional casualties, further underscoring the precariousness of life on the frontier. Today's gig economy initiatives, warehouse work, rideshare driving, often expose workers to hazards with minimal safeguards. Just as 19th century foremen occasionally disregarded safety for speed, modern managers sometimes sacrifice well-being for productivity targets. Two eras, one dilemma: prioritizing rapid completion over worker safety versus slowing down to protect human lives. The railroad's human toll reminds us that giants of progress stand on the backs of vulnerable laborers. Indigenous displacement beyond armed resistance. Railroad construction didn't merely provoke battles. It triggered a cascade of treaty violations, forced relocations, and cultural upheaval. As rails advanced through Sioux, Cheyenne, and Ute lands, treaties once guaranteeing territorial sovereignty were renegotiated under duress or simply ignored. The Fort Laramie Treaty, 1868, initially restricted railroads from entering Sioux territory, but when the Black Hills gold rush of the 1870s lured prospectors onto sacred lands, the U.S. government reneged. Military escorts protected miners, while railroads carried them deeper into tribal hunting grounds. Two eras, one dilemma: expanding infrastructure in defiance of existing agreements versus honoring treaties and risking slower growth. As buffalo herds collapsed, Plains tribes' economic foundations eroded. Crow and Cheyenne families who once followed migratory bison patterns found themselves confined to reservations, small parcels of land, often ecologically marginal. Children were sent to boarding schools hundreds of miles away, where they lost languages and cultural practices. The railroad, once a symbol of unity, became the artery through which settlers, soldiers, and regulators poured into indigenous homelands. Homes were burned, sacred sites bulldozed, ancestral connections severed. In 2025, debates over pipelines, mining leases, and renewable energy projects continue these patterns. Dakota Access Pipeline protests centered on the Standing Rock Sioux's 1851 treaty right to unspoiled water. Similarly, Navajo communities in New Mexico have resisted uranium mining expansions that threaten groundwater. Two eras, one dilemma: pursuing national priorities versus honoring indigenous sovereignty. The Transcontinental Railroad's legacy reminds us that infrastructure can serve as both lifeline and weapon, depending on who holds power. Two eras, one lesson. As the rails stretched across the continent, they brought transformative connectivity, but also labor exploitation, environmental degradation, and cultural dispossession. Chinese and Irish laborers exemplified courage and endurance, yet their sacrifices were marginalized. Native American tribes fought valiantly to defend their lands, only to be overwhelmed by superior weaponry and broken treaties. Two eras, one dilemma. Pursuing grand visions while mitigating human cost, versus postponing progress until all voices are heard. Today's infrastructure planners must grapple with the same equation, ensuring that development benefits do not become burdens unjustly borne by the most vulnerable. A smooth bridge to transformation and legacy, economic boom, environmental impact, and lessons for America. We've traced the railroad's forging, its reliance on immigrant and local labor, its clash with indigenous resistance, and its ecological toll. Now, we shift focus to the railroad's broader ripple effects. How it reshaped America's economy, transformed landscapes, and sparked innovations in timekeeping and commerce. In our next section, we'll examine how those iron rails not only connected coasts, but also rewrote the nation's environmental, social, and economic narratives. Two eras, one dilemma. Embracing the promise of transformation while grappling with the scars it leaves behind. Two eras, one dilemma. Reaping the rewards of rapid connectivity while confronting the long shadows it casts. When the Transcontinental Railroad's steel ribbons finally linked Pacific and Atlantic, America embarked on a new era of economic dynamism unlike any before. Towns blossomed along the tracks, industries flourished, and goods that once took months to ship now traversed the continent in days. Yet alongside that boom came environmental scars, deforested mountainsides, near-extinct buffalo herds, and displaced communities. In 2025, as we debate digital highways and green energy grids, we face similar questions. How do we chase progress without losing the essence of what we cherish? By examining the railroad's transformation and legacy, we can glean lessons about balancing opportunity and stewardship for our own time. Economic boom, towns, trade, and national markets. Almost overnight, towns that once existed only as dusty way stations became bustling hubs of commerce. Promontory Point, Utah, where the Golden Spike ceremony took place on May 10, 1869, was little more than a barren stretch of desert when Union Pacific and Central Pacific trains first met. Yet within weeks, entrepreneurs rushed in, hotel keepers, saloon owners, and general store merchants, eager to capitalize on the steady flow of railroad workers and, soon, passengers. By 1870, Promontory had a population of over 1,000, with its economy centered entirely on serving the railroad and the travelers it carried. Beyond isolated towns, the railroad wove a new national marketplace. Wheat farmers in Nebraska could now ship their grain to San Francisco for export to Asian markets, while California fruit growers delivered peaches and apricots to New York within a week of harvest, far faster than by ship. In Chicago, stockyards and meatpacking plants boomed, using refrigerated rail cars to send beef to East Coast cities in pristine condition. That development mirrored the rise of modern supply chains. Perishables no longer spoiled en route, regional specialization became profitable, and previously remote producers tapped into coast-to-coast demand. Two eras, one dilemma. Fostering economic interconnectedness while risking over-reliance on a single infrastructure. Real-life example. The town of Cheyenne, Wyoming, sits at the intersection of the Union Pacific Line and the Transcontinental Cattle Trails. Before the railroad, cattle drives to Dodge City took months, herds vulnerable to weather and stampedes. After the rails arrived in 1867, ranchers simply herded cattle a few miles to the Cheyenne stockyards, loaded them onto flat cars, and shipped them east. Cheyenne's population soared from a few dozen in 1866 to over 12,000 by 1870. Though that prosperity attracted merchants and boosters, it also brought lawlessness. Gambling halls, saloons, and brothels proliferated, forcing local authorities to scramble to maintain order. Across the West, similar stories unfolded. Reno, Nevada, transformed from a telegraph station in 1868 to a major commercial center by the early 1870s. Helena, Montana, initially a gold rush camp, found a sustainable future once the Northern Pacific and Montana Central lines offered direct shipping routes. Resources that once languished in regional isolation now flowed swiftly to factories, banks, and ports, knitting disparate frontiers into a unified economic fabric. Two eras, one dilemma. Harnessing transformative technologies while grappling with the unintended social consequences they unleash. Environmental impact, carving up the landscape. While economic gains rippled outward, environmental consequences emerged in stark relief. In the Sierra Nevada, tunnel blasting shredded ancient granite peaks. Central Pacific's crews detonated miles of tunnels through rock using black powder and early nitroglycerin. The resulting debris cascaded into valleys, altering water flow and displacing wildlife. Tree-lined slopes that once absorbed snowmelt and prevented avalanches gave way to bald scarps. By the 1880s, river levels fluctuated more wildly, harming fish populations downstream. On the Great Plains, rails severed the vast migratory routes of the American bison. Once numbering in the tens of millions, bison herds encountered steel tracks that fragmented their grazing grounds. Hunters, both Native American and white settlers, seized the opportunity to slaughter bison from moving trains, sometimes shooting for sport, other times to clear the path. Within 2 decades, the plains' iconic symbol teetered on extinction. Fewer than 1,000 bison remained by 1889. Two eras, one dilemma. Pursuing progress and settlement at the expense of ecological balance and species survival. Forests adjacent to track routes bore the brunt of constant tie production. Each mile of rail required roughly 3,000 wooden ties, drawn largely from surrounding pines and oaks. For Central Pacific, logging camps in the Sierra cut down millions of board feet of timber annually. Without reforestation efforts, erosion accelerated, soil washed into streams, and salmon runs in the Sacramento River dropped precipitously. Downstream, farming communities faced floods when rivers overflowed unanchored banks. Additionally, towns like Promontory and Cheyenne lacked sanitation infrastructure, so the byproducts of steam locomotives, coal ash, waste, and unfiltered smoke infected air and water. Residents reported railroad cough, akin to the bronchial irritation seen later in industrial cities. Two eras, one dilemma. Generating wealth through industrial activity versus safeguarding air, water, and wildlife. The environmental echoes of the Transcontinental Railroad continue. Some forests still struggle to recover, and prairie ecosystems bear the scars of fragmentation. Social transformation, migration, demographics, and culture. As the railroad consolidated national unity, it also reshaped America's demographic tapestry. Eastern Europeans, drawn by advertisements promising free tickets if they worked on the Union Pacific, flocked to Omaha and Cheyenne. Chinese laborers, after finishing Central Pacific contracts, spread throughout California, some settling in San Francisco's Chinatown, others drawn inland to farmlands irrigated by nascent canals. The sudden influx diversified formerly homogeneous frontier towns, bringing languages and customs from thousands of miles away. For Native Americans, the social transformation spelled dislocation and cultural erosion. Lakota Sioux, whose spiritual life centered on buffalo hunts, found ceremonial grounds dotted with steel rails. The sacred Black Hills in Dakota Territory, guaranteed to the Sioux by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, were invaded once gold was discovered, and miners poured in via newly laid tracks. Despite pleas from the Sioux to honor treaty boundaries, the U.S. Army escorted prospectors and veterans to staking claims. By 1877, the U.S. government forcibly seized the Black Hills, relegating the Sioux to reservations. Two eras, one dilemma. Forging national cohesion at the cost of dispossessing indigenous communities, versus honoring prior agreements and risking slower territorial expansion. Meanwhile, towns like Sacramento and later San Francisco glowed with gold rush-era ambitions reinvigorated by rail links. California oranges, grapes, and wine reached new markets. Entrepreneurs like Joseph Folsom and Leland Stafford parlayed railroad wealth into urban development, financing universities, hotels, and streetcar lines. Conversely, eastern cities such as Chicago morphed into meatpacking dynasties, drawing rural Midwesterners into factory jobs, accelerating urban migration. The railroad helped deliver fresh beef, pork, and produce to eastern tables in unprecedented quantities, fueling urban growth. Two eras, one dilemma. Urbanization drives economic opportunity versus straining municipal services and undermining rural communities. Innovation beyond transport, time zones, mail, and communication. The need to coordinate schedules across multiple states gave rise to standardized time zones. Before 1883, each town kept its own solar time, meaning clocks in Cleveland and Cincinnati could differ by several minutes. Minor inconveniences until trains needed precise, synchronized timetables. In November 1883, railroad companies nationwide adopted a standardized system, Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific time zones, transforming Americans' relationship with time. Two eras, one dilemma. Coordinating broad networks requires shared standards versus preserving local customs and autonomy. The railroad also revolutionized mail delivery. The post office department contracts with railroad companies expedited cross-country correspondence. Gone were the days when letters from San Francisco took months by ship. Now mail traveled aboard dead letter expresses, delivering civilian and military dispatches at lightning speed. In 1870s Nevada, a miner could write home on Monday and receive a reply in mid-October, an exchange that once took half a year in reverse. That accelerated communication reshaped politics, journalism, and personal relationships, foreshadowing today's instant messaging debates. Do we lose the art of patience when information travels so fast? Two eras, one dilemma. Valuing swift connection versus appreciating measured reflection. Telegraph lines paralleled rails across the continent, weaving a network that would later underpin long-distance telephone and, eventually, internet infrastructure. Stations along the tracks doubled as telegraph offices, where a signal tapped out words that spanned thousands of miles in seconds. These early experiments in rapid communication informed American industrial strategy, emphasizing the synergy between analog transportation and digital messaging. They remind us that no technology exists in isolation. Steel rails catalyzed telegraphs, which later gave birth to phones and fiber optics. Cultural legacies, icons, myths, and memory. The Transcontinental Railroad ingrained itself into American culture, forging legends that persist in literature, film, and folklore. Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows, touring Europe with authentic reenactments of frontier life, depended on railroad mobility to reach cities from Kansas to London. His partner, Annie Oakley, shot glass balls off playing cards thousands of miles from her birthplace, electrifying audiences and cementing the railroad's image as the great leveler, tying diverse communities together through shared spectacle. Mark Twain captured the epic scope in Roughing It, his 1872 memoir. I saw the kind of country that makes the warm heart of a patriot glow within his bosom, ranging with no visible limit to his eye, and wearing over it the garb of green, flecked with golden blossoms. Twain's words echoed a national sentiment that the railroad unveiled America's true promise. Two eras, one dilemma. Celebrating expansion versus recognizing the people and ecosystems left behind. Yet the railroad also birthed cautionary tales. In novels like Owen Wister's The Virginian, the hero's stoicism on rails, moral codes tested by speed and distance, symbolized the tension between tradition and modernity. Contemporary filmmakers revisited these stories, showing trains as harbingers of both progress and dislocation. In 2023, the documentary Spikes and Souls chronicled the lives of descendants of Chinese railroad workers, highlighting how exclusionary laws and forgotten graves near Promontory Summit belied the railroad's grand narrative. Two eras, one dilemma. Celebrating a unifying achievement versus reckoning with its darker undercurrents. Two eras, one lesson. The story of the Transcontinental Railroad offers a timeless lesson. Transformative infrastructure can yield immense benefits, yet those benefits come at a cost: social, environmental, and cultural. When Congress and President Lincoln greenlit the project, they chose unity over division. They bet that rails would knit coasts into a common destiny. The gamble paid off in economic fortune and national identity. But the scars, deforested mountains, near-extinct buffalo herds, and fractured indigenous homelands linger as reminders that progress must be weighed against preservation. In 2025, when policymakers debate high-speed rail corridors, broadband expansion into rural areas, or cross-border energy pipelines, they face a similar trade-off. Do we prioritize rapid growth and connectivity, or do we safeguard landscapes, communities, and histories that may never fully recover? By studying the railroad's successes and oversights, we grasp that no infrastructure becomes a neutral background. Rather, it shapes societies in profound ways, for better and for worse. A smooth transition to reflection and modern parallels. Having traced the transformation wrought by the Transcontinental Railroad, its economic boom, environmental upheaval, and cultural legacies, we turn our gaze to the present and future. Infrastructure today isn't merely steel rails, it's digital highways, renewable energy grids, and global supply chains. Our challenge remains to pursue visionary projects that connect and uplift, while honoring the communities and ecosystems that provide their foundations. In our final section, we'll reflect on modern parallels, how 21st century America negotiates these dilemmas with new tools and philosophies. Two eras, one dilemma. Forging paths forward that respect both dreams and differences. Let's carry forward the lessons of the past as we build the networks of tomorrow. Two eras, one dilemma. Forging bonds of the heart amid rigid structures. We've journeyed from the torchlit chambers of medieval courtship to the smoky tunnels of the Sierra Nevada, tracing how love, leadership, and infrastructure shaped human destinies. In the Middle Ages, a young knight's quest to win a lady's favor often collided with family mandates, economic bids, and church doctrine. In 2025, swiping right on a dating app, drafting prenuptial agreements, or navigating social media scrutiny all reflect that same tension. Personal desire confronting communal expectations. Real-life example. In 12th century France, a peasant couple exchanged secret vows beneath the harvest moon, defying their family's livestock negotiations. Today, a couple in New York might elope to Las Vegas, eluding Instagram's watchful eye, echoing that medieval spirit of rebellion. The lesson: love flourishes most freely when individuals learn to negotiate boundaries, balancing affection with accountability. Two eras, one dilemma. Leading with conviction when society says otherwise. Nomadic champions like Queen Immerse rose on horseback to defend their people's freedom, challenging the mighty Persian Empire. Her people valued prowess over pedigree, enabling a woman's leadership in ways rare elsewhere. In our own era, consider Admiral Michelle Howard's command of naval fleets or Brigadier General Christine Nyangoma guiding peacekeeping missions, women embodying strength in arenas once closed to them. Each story underscores that true leadership transcends gendered expectations. Real-life example. In 2023, a corporate board in Silicon Valley appointed its first female CEO, citing her track record of innovation under pressure, much as a Massachusetts council once recognized Immerse's strategic acumen. The lesson: courage often requires stepping into roles that defy tradition, forging new paths for those who follow. Two eras, one dilemma. Building connections across vast distances at tremendous cost. The Transcontinental Railroad stitched coasts together, driving commerce and migration. Yet its steel arteries cleaved indigenous homelands and starred natural landscapes. In 2021, broadband initiatives aim to bring high-speed internet to rural America, promising educational access and telehealth. But the rollout sometimes overlooked communities lacking digital literacy or infrastructure. Real-life example. In the late 1860s, Cheyenne, Wyoming, exploded from a tent camp to a rail hub, transforming local economies but also attracting gambling and lawlessness. Today, a town in rural Colorado might celebrate new fiber optic lines but simultaneously grapple with increased home prices as remote workers flood in. The lesson: infrastructure can ignite prosperity, but planners must weigh environmental preservation and social equity. Two eras, one dilemma. Honoring heritage while embracing innovation. Medieval troubadours composed verses that celebrated lofty ideals of courtly love, preserving oral traditions that shaped communal identity. But when scribes copied those songs into manuscripts, they risked losing subtle nuances meant for live performance. In modern times, we archive digital art and music, yet face obsolescence as platforms change. Real-life example. A folk singer in Montana uploads a vinyl remastered album online, ensuring legacy for future generations, just as Scythian bards sang epic tales by campfire to pass down clan histories. The lesson: capturing the spirit of cultural expression requires both preserving soundtracks of the past and anticipating the formats of tomorrow. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Negotiating progress with respect for place. The railroad's arrival in the Black Hills spurred a gold rush that displaced the Sioux. In 2022, a proposed pipeline through a rainforest threatened indigenous tribes' subsistence. Both spur economic development yet imperil ancestral lands. Real-life example. In 1876, Fort Laramie Treaty boundaries were ignored once gold seekers streamed via rail into sacred territory. In 2024, a bridge expansion threatened wetlands cherished by local communities. The lesson: any project promising growth must incorporate genuine consultation with affected populations, seeking consent rather than imposing unilateral designs. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Forging unity across cultural divides under a shared framework. The Union Pacific and Central Pacific companies, tied by Congress's Pacific Railway Act, supported the Union during the Civil War but also exploited land grants, spawning the credit mobilier scandal. Similarly today, public-private partnerships in renewable energy can spur innovation but may also lead to cronyism if oversight falters. Real-life example. A solar farm in Arizona received generous federal tax incentives, yet local contractors complained they were shut out in favor of large conglomerates. The lesson: transparent governance and community engagement strengthen bonds, preventing disillusionment when lofty ideals meet real-world politics. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Reconciling economic opportunity with social justice. Chinese laborers on the Central Pacific laid miles of track through the Sierra Nevada, enduring deadly avalanches and pay discrimination. More than 10,000 men toiled for scant recognition. Today, migrant farm workers across California pick produce that supplies national grocery chains, yet often lack housing and health care. Real-life example. In 1868, Chinese crews blasted through Tunnel No. 6 under bone-chilling conditions. In 2025, Central Valley workers face extreme heat with limited shade and water. The lesson: societies prosper most when they uplift all contributors, ensuring fair treatment and visibility for those whose hands build our foundations. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Celebrating innovation while mitigating unintended fallout. The railroad introduced standardized time zones, synchronizing clocks across continents. But that rigid schedule imposed new pressures on rural communities accustomed to solar time. Today, app-based gig platforms promise flexible work but can trap workers in erratic schedules without benefits. Real-life example. In 1883, American rail companies instituted time zones to prevent crashes. In 2023, a rideshare app tweaked its algorithm to favor quick pickups but left drivers scrambling for unpredictable fares. The lesson: every technological advance must be paired with thoughtful policies to protect those most affected by change. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Preserving communal bonds when speed accelerates life. Promontory Summit's ornate Golden Spike ceremony commemorated unity, yet attendance excluded the very workers, Chinese and Native Americans, whose toil underpinned the celebration. In 2025, remote video conferences link dispersed teams worldwide, yet exclude frontline workers unable to access high-speed internet. Real-life example. A corporate all-hands meeting streamed globally, but factory staff remained in echoing plant floors without screens. The lesson: inclusion demands bridging digital divides, inviting all stakeholders to the table rather than celebrating progress in echo chambers. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Merging personal agency with collective welfare. Medieval betrothals tied individuals to family alliances, yet secret letters allowed lovers to assert private desires. In 2025, dating apps propose matches using algorithms that reflect user preferences but risk shaping homogeneous communities. Real-life example. A 13th century peasant woman copied a love sonnet on ragged parchment to defy her father's arranged match. Today, a Boston professional swipes left on 200 profiles to find someone who aligns with her values, yet wonders if the pursuit of the perfect match distances her from serendipity. The lesson: balancing curated choices with openness to surprise nurtures genuine connections. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Learning from history to navigate modern frontiers. Immerse's strategic alliance among nomadic clans kept her people free, but her story was recorded by outsiders who sometimes distorted her legacy. Today's climate activists may lead transformative shifts, yet their voices risk marginalization in mainstream narratives. Real-life example. In 530 BCE, Immerse refused Cyrus's marital overture to safeguard Massaget's autonomy. In 2020, indigenous land defenders block pipeline projects to protect sacred waters. The lesson: authentic representation requires uplifting voices from within communities, ensuring histories and futures reflect lived experiences, not only external interpretations. Throughout our exploration, from medieval marriage laws to nomadic courtship to the forging of iron across America, we've seen that progress and tradition dance a complex waltz. Love blossoms when boundaries are respected yet gently bent. Leadership emerges when individuals honor community values while advocating for change. Infrastructure knits regions together at the risk of fraying ecological and cultural tapestries. 2 eras, 1 dilemma. Charting paths forward that recognize the debts owed to those who came before, even as we build new foundations. As we step beyond these stories, consider how your own life echoes these themes. When you negotiate the delicate balance between personal ambition and communal responsibility, whether in relationships, workplaces, or civic life, you stand at a crossroads that medieval troubadours, nomadic queens, and railroad pioneers once faced. Will you embrace connectivity with humility, acknowledging unseen contributors? Will you champion innovation tempered by justice and stewardship? Will you celebrate unity without silencing disparate voices? In weaving love, leadership, and lines on the map, history offers both inspiration and caution. Our modern challenge: to build digital highways, green energy systems, and social networks that foster equitable progress. May the past's triumphs and tribulations guide us, reminding us that forging a shared future means honoring every node, every heart, every leader, every ridge of earth we connect along the way.